Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was already halfway down Maple Ridge when I noticed the light. It was close to midnight, the kind of late where the neighborhood felt abandoned, but not asleep. Porch lights were off, windows dark, no traffic. I'd gone out for a walk because I couldn't focus at home. Too much noise in my head, not enough anywhere else. That stretch of road curved along a line of trees and empty lots, and I'd walked it enough times that my body knew it without thinking. I looked up because the sky felt brighter than it should have been. At first, it looked like a star slipping out from behind a cloud. One steady white point, not blinking, not pulsing. I didn't stop walking. I barely registered it. Planes crossed over all the time, and satellites were easy to spot if you paid attention. But something about it felt off. It was low. Lower than a satellite, but higher than any drone I'd seen, and it wasn't moving the way planes did. No straight line speed, no gradual fade. It was drifting. I slowed my pace without meaning to. The light slowed too. That got my attention. I stopped walking. The light stopped. Not faded, not dimmed, just paused. Suspended in the same spot above the trees like it had hit an invisible wall. I stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, staring up. My first thought was that it was coincidence, perspective, some trick of depth and motion. Your brain loved doing that when it was tired. I took one step forward. The light moved, same direction, same speed. I stopped again. It stopped. A weird pressure settled in my chest like the air had thickened. Everything around me felt too still. No wind in the leaves, no insects. Even the distant highway noise seemed muted. I laughed quietly, more out of nerves than humor, and started walking again, deliberately this time. Faster. The light matched me perfectly. I slowed to a crawl. It slowed. I turned around and walked the other way. The light changed direction instantly, gliding back across the sky to stay aligned with me. That's when my stomach dropped. I wasn't being followed exactly. It didn't feel like something chasing me. It felt like something was anchored to my position. Like I was the thing moving and it was adjusting around me. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and craned my neck back until it hurt. The light waited. I checked my phone. No notifications. Signal was there, but the compass app spun for a second before settling in the wrong direction. I locked the screen and slipped it back into my pocket without trying to take a photo. I didn't want to break whatever weird balance had formed. I started walking again toward home this time. The light came with me. Every step I took, it slid across the sky. When I paused to retie my shoe, it froze. When I leaned forward, it shifted forward. When I stepped back, it adjusted backward. At one point, I crossed under a streetlight, and the glare forced me to look down. When I glanced back up, the light was still there, exactly where it should have been. The realization crept in slowly and made my skin prickle. It wasn't reacting to where I was. It was reacting to when I moved. I tested it. I took one step forward and stopped mid-stride, freezing with my foot hovering an inch above the ground. The light moved during that half step and then halted when I did. I felt suddenly exposed, like I'd stepped into a spotlight without realizing it. I kept going. The closer I got to my street, the more wrong everything felt. Houses I knew well looked flat and unfamiliar, like sets built too quickly. My footsteps sounded delayed, like the sound wasn't syncing up right. I stopped again, right at the corner. The light stopped. I stayed there longer this time. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing changed. I whispered, "Okay," to nobody. When I started walking again, the light followed like it had been waiting. I made it to my driveway and stood there, staring up at the patch of sky above my neighbor's roof where the light hovered. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what I expected it to do next, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside yet. I took one step backward. The light slid backward. I took 2 steps forward. It followed. I felt stupid, standing there playing this silent game with something I didn't understand, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know where the boundary was. I turned and walked up the driveway. The light stayed aligned until the roof blocked my view. I went inside and locked the door, leaning my forehead against it for a second. The house felt hollow. like it had been waiting too. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening, I told myself it had been stress, fatigue, my brain misfiring. I almost didn't go out, but the urge to check was stronger than the fear. I took the same route, same time, same weather. Nothing happened for the first 10 minutes. Then, just past the park, the light appeared again. Same brightness, same height. I stopped immediately. It stopped. There was no denying it anymore. I walked. It moved. I stopped. It froze. This time I stayed out longer. I walked in loops, doubled back, paused at random intervals. Each time, the light responded perfectly, like it was tied to some invisible marker above my head. I sped up to a jog. It kept pace. I slowed to a near standstill. It slowed too. It never drifted ahead, never lagged behind, never overshot. It felt less like it was watching me and more like it was tracking a variable, like movement itself was the trigger. At one point, I stood completely still for so long my legs started to ache. The light hung there, unwavering. I felt an overwhelming sense of being observed, not in a personal way, but in the way a machine observes data. Neutral, detached, precise. I went home again. Same ending. As soon as I stepped inside, the light vanished. The third time it happened, something changed. I stopped walking in the middle of the street and didn't move for a long time. Cars didn't pass. Windows stayed dark. After maybe a minute, the light shifted, just slightly. It drifted sideways on its own, breaking the pattern for the first time. My heart jumped. It moved a little farther, then stopped, like it had decided to disengage. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After a few seconds, it slid away toward the horizon and faded into the clouds. I stood there long after it was gone. I still go on late walks. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, or waiting. Sometimes I stop for no reason at all and stand perfectly still, listening to the quiet, watching the sky. When I do, I get this strange feeling, like I'm being measured again. So far, nothing has come back. I woke up because the room felt wrong, not because of a noise. It was the kind of half-awake moment where your eyes are still closed but your body is already alert. Something was pressing down on me, not physically, just this heavy sense that the air had changed. Then I realized there was a sound. It was low and steady, almost below hearing. More like pressure than noise, like standing near a transformer or a big generator somewhere far away. It didn't come from outside the window or from any one direction. It felt like it was coming from above the house, straight down through the ceiling. I lay there for a few seconds trying to place it. I thought maybe a truck was idling nearby or a plane passing overhead. But it didn't rise or fade like an engine. It was perfectly even, like it had been switched on and left alone. My ears felt full, like when you're changing altitude too fast. I checked the clock on my nightstand. It was 2:38 a.m. The house was quiet otherwise. No fridge hum, no air vents kicking on. The heater hadn't run in hours. I held my breath, just to make sure it wasn't coming from me somehow. The sound didn't change. The weirdest part was how calm it felt. Not comforting, exactly, but neutral. Like whatever was making the sound wasn't in a hurry and didn't care whether I noticed it or not. I finally sat up. The instant my shoulders left the mattress, the hum stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone flipped a switch. The sudden silence made my ears ring sharply, a high-pitched tone that cut through my head. I winced and pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The ringing slowly settled into a dull hiss. The house felt hollow after that, like all the background noise had been sucked out and hadn't fully come back yet. Even the silence sounded thin. I stayed sitting there, heart starting to thump harder now that the sound was gone. I listened for anything else. Footsteps, wind, a car passing. Nothing. After maybe 30 seconds, the normal sounds returned in pieces. The fridge clicked on, a pipe ticked somewhere in the wall, the ringing in my ears finally faded. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside was dark and still, no lights in the sky, no neighbors moving around. My street was empty, lined with parked cars and tall trees that blocked most of the view upward. I craned my neck, trying to see above the roofline. Nothing. I opened the window a crack. Cool air came in, smelling faintly like damp leaves. No sound, no vibration. I told myself it was probably a power thing, some kind of electrical equipment cycling on and off, even though that didn't explain why it stopped the exact second I sat up. I went back to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, wide awake now. I waited for the hum to come back. It didn't. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, my alarm was going off. Morning light filled the room like nothing had happened. I almost convinced myself it had been a dream until I noticed how tired I felt. Not groggy, but drained, like I hadn't rested at all. That night, it happened again. This time, I was awake when it started. I was lying on my back, scrolling through my phone, trying to wind down. The house was quiet, lights off, just the glow of the screen. At 2:41 a.m., the air changed. My phone vibrated in my hand as the signal dropped to 0 bars. The screen dimmed slightly, like the battery had taken a sudden hit. Then the hum started. Same low frequency, same even pressure. It felt stronger this time, like it was pressing directly on my chest. My ribs felt tight, like it was harder to take a full breath. I didn't move. I stared at the ceiling and waited, heart pounding, phone forgotten in my hand. The hum didn't fluctuate. It didn't grow louder. It just existed. I became acutely aware of how small the room felt, how thin the ceiling was, how exposed the house suddenly seemed. My ears started to ache. I sat up. The hum cut out instantly again. The ringing came back, sharper this time. My phone buzzed with notifications all at once as the signal returned. I checked the battery. It had dropped 8% in less than a minute. I didn't sleep after that. The third night, I set up my phone to record audio before going to bed. I didn't really expect it to catch anything, but I needed proof that it wasn't just in my head. The hum started at 2:39 a.m. I felt it wake me before I heard it. My chest tightened, breath shallow. The sound pressed down through the ceiling like weight. I reached for the phone and forced myself to stay still, even though every instinct told me to sit up. The pressure built slowly, not louder, just heavier. Then my ears started ringing before I moved. That scared me. I sat up hard. Silence. Later, when I checked the recording, there was nothing, just my breathing, the faint rustle of sheets, and then silence again. No hum. No vibration. But the timestamp jumped forward by almost 3 minutes. I started paying attention after that. I noticed that the nights it happened, the stars directly above my house looked dimmer when I checked the window afterward. Not gone, just muted, like something thin and translucent was in the way. It never happened on nights when it was raining. It never happened when I had someone else in the house. One night, I didn't sit up right away. The hum went on longer than usual. My chest felt tight, and my vision started to blur around the edges. The ringing in my ears came back even though the sound was still there. That's when I panicked and sat up. The silence slammed back in, and I gasped like I'd been underwater. After that, I stopped trying to record it. I stopped checking the time. I started sleeping on the couch sometimes, closer to the ground, even though it didn't seem to make a difference. Eventually, the hum stopped coming. Weeks passed without anything happening. My sleep slowly returned to normal, though I still woke up sometimes with that same heavy feeling, like I'd missed something important. I thought it was over. Then my neighbor, Carl, mentioned offhand one afternoon that he'd been waking up with ringing ears lately. He laughed it off, said it was probably age or allergies. He didn't mention a sound, he didn't mention pressure. I didn't ask questions. The hum hasn't come back since. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed late at night, the house feels too quiet again, like the background noise hasn't fully returned. When that happens, I don't sit up right away. I wait and listen, just in case. I was already tired when it happened, the kind of tired where you feel slightly disconnected from your own body. I was driving home from my sister's place, same route I'd taken 100 times. 2-lane road, no streetlights, just fields and tree lines and the occasional mailbox reflecting my headlights. It was late enough that there was almost no traffic, which I usually liked. That road felt familiar in a way that let your brain drift while your hands stayed on autopilot. I remember passing the old grain silos on the left. I remember slowing slightly for the curve near the creek because there's always deer there. I remember thinking I should have left earlier. Then the night changed. There wasn't a flash or a bang or anything dramatic like that. It was more like the darkness loosened. The sky ahead of me seemed thinner. That's the only word that fits. Like the black ceiling above the road had been stretched too tight and was starting to tear. Everything took on this faint gray-blue brightness, not enough to cast shadows, but enough that I could see the fields on either side without relying on my headlights. My first thought was distant lightning. Heat lightning, maybe. But there were no clouds. The sky had been clear all night. The brightness didn't pulse or flicker. It just existed, steady and wrong. I remember my eyes watering, not from light, but from the pressure of trying to focus on something that didn't behave like normal light. The radio cut out, not static, just silence. The display stayed on, but the sound dropped away like someone had turned a knob slowly all the way down. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and glanced at the dashboard. Everything looked normal, speed steady, engine fine, no warning lights. The road ahead looked longer than it should have, thus stretching out in a way that made distance feel unreliable. The yellow lines seemed slightly too pale, like they were being washed out. That's when the feeling hit. That awareness again. Not panic, not exactly fear. More like being aware of a presence without seeing anyone. Like the sense you get when someone is standing just out of frame. I checked my mirrors. Empty road behind me. No headlights. No movement in the fields. The brightness increased just a little, enough that I could see the texture of the asphalt beyond my headlights. I felt exposed inside the car, like the metal and glass weren't doing much anymore. I remember thinking very clearly that I should pull over. That thought didn't turn into action. Instead, my mind sort of slipped. That's the best way I can describe it. Like when you're reading and realize you've turned 3 pages without absorbing a single word. There was no jolt or blackout, just a soft disconnect. The next thing I remember clearly is the brightness fading. The sky darkened back to normal, smoothly, like someone dimming a light. The radio came back mid-song, loud enough to make me flinch. My headlights suddenly felt too bright, harsh against the darkness. I blinked hard and realized my mouth was dry. The road sign ahead of me made my stomach drop. It was the sign for the county line, one I shouldn't have seen yet, not for several more miles. I lifted my foot off the gas without meaning to. The car slowed, and I felt this hollow pressure in my chest, like the bottom had fallen out of something important. I tried to rewind my memory, tried to picture the last few minutes. I could remember the silos. I could remember the curve by the creek. After that, there was nothing. No stretch of road, no landmarks, no sense of movement, just that thinning brightness, and then here. I checked the clock. 9 minutes had passed. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't turned. I hadn't missed any exits. There was no reason for me to be this far along. My hands started shaking on the wheel. I pulled over at the next wide shoulder, gravel crunching loud in the quiet. I put the car in park and sat there, engine running, listening to it idle. The night felt heavier now, like it was pressing in closer than before. I got out of the car. The air was cool, still, no wind. The stars were sharp and normal again, and that which somehow made everything worse. I walked a few steps away from the car and looked back down the road I'd come from. It looked ordinary, empty. The darkness behaved the way darkness was supposed to. I didn't see any lights in the sky. I didn't hear anything strange, but the sense of being watched hadn't fully gone away. It was faint now, like an afterimage. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no notifications, battery normal. Location services showed my route as a clean line, no gaps, no jumps. That bothered me more than anything else. I got back in the car and finished the drive home without incident, but I stayed tense the whole way, flinching at every reflection and movement in the fields. At home, I sat in the driveway for a long time before going inside. I felt drained in a way that sleep didn't fix. My muscles ached, like I'd been clenching without realizing it. I slept poorly, kept waking up with the sense that I'd missed something important. The next morning, I drove that same road in daylight. I took it slow, watching for anything out of place. Everything lined up, the distances made sense, the landmarks came when they should have. But when I reached the stretch where my memory stopped the night before, I felt it again. That faint pressure, like the air there was different, not visible, just wrong. Nothing happened. I still drive that road. I don't have much choice, but I don't let my mind drift anymore. I keep the radio low. I watch the sky more than the road, even though I know that doesn't make sense. Sometimes, late at night, I get the feeling that the darkness ahead of me is thinning again. Just a little. When that happens, I slow down and focus on breathing, and I don't look directly at the sky until it passes. So far, it always does. I hope it keeps doing that. I was already halfway around the block when I noticed the light. It was late, a little after midnight, and I'd gone out because I couldn't sleep. That happened a lot after my split with Dana. The house felt too quiet, and walking helped burn off the leftover energy. I took the same route most nights, looping through the older part of the neighborhood where the sidewalks were cracked and the streetlights were spaced too far apart. The air was cool and damp, not quite foggy, but heavy enough that sounds didn't travel far. My footsteps felt loud in my ears. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. I was cutting past the park when something caught my eye above the trees. At first I thought it was a plane. There was a single white light moving slowly across the sky, steady and smooth. No blinking, no color changes. It wasn't very bright, but it stood out against the clouds. I kept walking and didn't think much of it. Planes passed overhead all the time. There was a small airport about 30 miles away. But then I noticed how slow it was. Not drifting slow, like a satellite, more deliberate. It moved at a steady pace, almost matching my walking speed, sliding from left to right above the tree line. I slowed down a little, just to check something. The light slowed too. I stopped walking. The light stopped. It didn't fade, it didn't drift. It just hung there, perfectly still, suspended in the sky. I stood there with one foot slightly forward, my weight shifted awkwardly, staring up. My heart started to beat faster, not from fear exactly, but from that sudden realization that something didn't line up. After a few seconds, I took a step forward. The light moved again. Same direction, same speed. I laughed quietly to myself, mostly out of disbelief. I told myself it was coincidence. Perspective. My movement tricking my eyes. I walked again, deliberately this time, 3 steps. The light slid along above me, keeping pace. I stopped. It stopped. The silence felt heavier all of a sudden. Even the background hum of the city seemed to drop out. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. I looked around to make sure I wasn't the only one outside. The park was empty. Houses were dark. No cars passed. I raised my hand and waved it, feeling stupid. The light didn't react. I started walking again, faster this time. The light followed, still smooth, still silent. It didn't bob or sway. It didn't lag behind or pull ahead. It stayed exactly where it was relative to me. My skin prickled along my arms. I tried something else. I turned around and walked the other direction. The light changed direction instantly, sliding back the way it had come, still pacing me. That's when the fear finally kicked in. Not panic, but that cold, sinking feeling in my stomach that comes when you realize you don't understand the rules of what's happening. I told myself to stay calm, to keep moving, to get home. I headed toward my street, forcing myself not to break into a run. The light stayed with me, hovering above the line of houses now, partially obscured by roofs and chimneys, but always visible when there was a gap. I stopped again, right at the corner. The light stopped. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing changed. I reached into my pocket for my phone. The screen lit up my hand, and my signal dropped to nothing. No bars. The battery indicator flickered and dropped by 2% in the second it took me to unlock it. I didn't bother trying to take a picture. I already knew what would happen. I put the phone away and started walking again. The light moved. By the time I reached my driveway, my legs felt shaky. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, and looked up one last time. The light hovered above the house across the street, just beyond the roofline. I took a step backward. It slid backward. I took a step forward. It followed. I unlocked the door and went inside, closing it quietly behind me like that mattered. I stood in the dark living room, heart pounding, listening. Nothing. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see out. The light was gone. I didn't sleep much that night. Every small sound made me sit up. I checked the windows twice. I kept expecting that low pressure feeling, like the air was changing again. The next night, I went out walking anyway. I told myself I wasn't going to let one weird thing mess up my routine. I stuck to the same route, same pace. Nothing happened. No light. The night after that, I almost convinced myself it had been stress, lack of sleep, my brain filling in gaps. Then it happened again. This time I saw it sooner. Same single white light, same height, same steady glow. It appeared above the trees as I crossed into the park. I stopped immediately. The light stopped. There was no doubt anymore. I started walking, slow and careful, like I might spook it if I moved wrong. The light matched me exactly. I sped up, it sped up. I slowed, it slowed. I tried walking sideways along the path. The light adjusted smoothly, never overshooting, never hesitating. It felt less like something following me and more like something tracking my position, like I was the reference point. I stayed out longer that night, testing it. I walked in loops, I doubled back, I paused randomly. Every time the light responded, it never came closer, never farther away. It kept the same distance, like there was an invisible line it wouldn't cross. Eventually, my fear shifted into something else. Not curiosity exactly, more like resignation. I went home. The light stayed with me until I reached my driveway again. When I stopped, it stopped. When I stepped inside and closed the door, it vanished. The third time it happened, I didn't go home right away. I walked until my legs hurt, circling the neighborhood, moving faster and faster, daring it to mess up. It didn't. At one point, I stood in the middle of the street, breathing hard, sweat cooling on my neck, staring straight up. I whispered, "What are you doing?" The light didn't react. When I finally turned toward home, it followed one last time. At my door, I stopped. The light stopped. I waited, keys in hand. After a few seconds, the light moved on its own. It drifted sideways, slow and deliberate, away from me and toward the far end of the street. It didn't speed up, it didn't fade. It just slid along until the houses blocked my view. I haven't seen it since. I still go on late walks. I keep my pace steady. Sometimes, when I stop for no reason at all, I feel that same tightness in my chest, like something is waiting to see what I'll do next. When that happens, I don't look up right away. I start walking again first. I was already outside when I noticed it, leaning back in the lawn chair with a blanket pulled up to my chest. It was late summer, one of those nights where the heat finally lets go after midnight. Crickets were loud enough to blur together, and the sky was clear in that way that almost feels fake, like someone cleaned it. I'd been staring up for a while, not really tracking anything specific. I wasn't doing long exposures or using binoculars, just looking. I liked finding patterns, the same way some people trace shapes in clouds. I'd grown up out here outside of Miles City, and the stars always felt close. No streetlights, no traffic noise, just open dark. I noticed the dimming because it didn't match anything else. A small cluster of stars, nothing special, just part of the mess above the tree line, lost brightness all at once. Not flickering, not fading, more like someone passed a hand slowly in front of them. At first, I thought it was my eyes. I blinked hard and shifted in the chair. The stars stayed dim. Then they dimmed more, like something was sliding across them. I sat up, blanket slipping off my legs, and tried to focus. The shape wasn't solid. I couldn't outline it cleanly. It was more like a smooth absence, a moving gap where the stars should have been. No edges, no shimmer. It moved steadily, left to right, at a speed that felt deliberate. Too slow to be a meteor, too smooth to be a plane. No blinking lights, no sound at all. The crickets didn't stop. The wind didn't change. Everything else stayed normal, which somehow made it worse. I stood up without meaning to. The grass felt cold under my feet, even through my socks. I remember thinking I should grab my phone, but the thought came and went without my hands moving. I just watched. The shape crossed maybe the width of my hand, held at arm's length. As it moved, the stars behind it stayed dim, then popped back to normal brightness once it passed. No afterimage, no distortion, just gone. When it reached the darker part of the sky near the trees, it thinned out and vanished. Not faded, just gone. 1 second there was a patch of dimness, the next second the stars were exactly how they'd been before. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. No follow-up, no second pass. The sky looked boring again. I went back inside and told myself it was probably a cloud, even though there weren't any, or maybe some weird atmospheric thing. I didn't Google it, I didn't text anyone, I just went to bed feeling off, like I'd missed a step on the stairs. The next night, I went back out. I told myself it was curiosity, but it felt more like checking a lock twice. Same chair, same spot in the yard. I brought my phone this time and set it on the armrest. Screen dark but ready. The sky was just as clear. Nothing happened for almost an hour. I started to relax, started feeling stupid for expecting anything at all. I scrolled a little, dimmed the screen again. leaned back, then it happened again. Different part of the sky this time. Higher up, another small cluster of stars dulled together like someone turning a dial. My heart kicked hard enough that I felt it in my throat. I didn't stand this time. I raised my phone and pointed it up, fumbling to unlock it. The camera app took longer than it should have, or maybe it didn't. It felt slow. By the time the screen showed the sky, the dimming shape was already moving. On the display, it looked even stranger. The stars were sharp, but the dark patch wasn't blurry or pixelated. It was just missing. I hit record. The shape slid across the stars in a straight line, same smooth pace as before. No wobble, no change in speed. It didn't react to me filming it. It didn't change at all. Then it vanished again. I kept recording for another minute, breathing louder than I realized, then stopped and checked the video. The stars were there. The crickets were loud in the audio. The dark shape was barely visible unless I scrubbed frame by frame, and even then it looked like compression noise. Nothing I could point to and say, there, that's it. I didn't sleep much after that. Every little sound outside felt closer. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Not every night. Not at the same hour. Always clear skies, always quiet, always the same smooth movement. It never came closer, never dipped lower. It stayed among the stars, like it belonged there. Once, my neighbor Paul stopped by in the evening. He asked what I'd been doing outside so late lately. I told him I'd been stargazing. He laughed and said I should invest in a telescope. I almost asked him to stay, but I didn't. The last time it happened, I was lying flat on the grass, phone on my chest, not even recording. I was tired of trying to prove it to myself. The dimming started directly overhead. For a split second, I had the thought that if it kept going, it would pass right over me. It didn't. It crossed the stars and disappeared like it always did. After that night, it stopped. Or maybe I stopped noticing. I still go outside sometimes and look up, but the sky feels different now. Not threatening, just less empty. I still have the videos on my phone. I haven't shown them to anyone. They don't really show anything. But every now and then, when the sky is clear and quiet, I catch myself watching a little harder, waiting for a part of it to dim, just enough to let me know it wasn't my imagination. I woke up because my arm had gone numb. I'd fallen asleep on my back with one hand resting on my chest, phone somewhere near my pillow. The room was dark. In that way, it gets right before morning when the night hasn't let go yet, but the air feels thinner. I remember blinking a few times, trying to get my bearings, and noticing right away that something was off. My phone screen was on. That alone wasn't weird. I sometimes fell asleep watching videos or scrolling. What stopped me was the angle. The phone was propped up against my water glass, tilted straight up, camera lens aimed at the ceiling. The camera app was open. I hadn't done that. I lay there for a few seconds, not moving, just staring at the faint glow of the screen. My ceiling fan was still, no light from outside, no noise except the low hum of my fridge down the hall. I picked up the phone. The screen dimmed as I touched it, like it had been sitting idle for a while. The camera was still active, front-facing, recording nothing but drywall. I felt that slow, creeping tension start in my chest, the kind that doesn't spike, just settles in and spreads. I swiped out of the camera and opened my photos. The most recent image was time-stamped 2:14 a.m. I took it at 2:14 a.m. According to the phone, I tapped it. At first, it just looked like a picture of my ceiling. Same hairline crack near the corner, same smoke detector shadow. But then my eyes adjusted and I saw the glow. It was faint, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A soft, pale wash of light spread across the ceiling, not centered, more like it was bleeding in from above the frame. Not a circle, not a beam. Just brightness, like something was illuminating the room from a place that didn't make sense. It didn't look like headlights. It wasn't warm like a lamp. It had no clear source. I zoomed in. The grain got worse, but the glow stayed consistent. I checked the next photo. There wasn't one, just the single image. My phone said I'd slept for almost 6 hours straight. No interruptions, no screen unlocks, no app usage except the camera. I sat up in bed and listened. The house felt wrong. Not silent exactly, but muted, like someone had turned the volume down on everything. I couldn't hear the usual night sounds outside. No cars on the road, no wind, no insects. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor was cold, grounding in a way I needed. I walked to the bedroom door and opened it slowly. The hallway was dark, same as always. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the back door. Everything was locked. No lights on, no signs anyone had been there. When I came back to the bedroom, I noticed something else. My curtains were parted, not all the way, just enough that a thin slice of window was exposed. I always closed them completely. The streetlight outside shone straight into my room otherwise, and I hated that. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the gap. I pulled the curtain closed. Nothing happened. No movement outside, no sudden noise, just darkness. I didn't go back to sleep. The next morning, I showed the photo to my sister, Mara, over coffee. She frowned at it, tilted her head. Probably some kind of reflection, she said, or your phone adjusting exposure. From what? I asked. The lights were off, curtains closed. She shrugged. Phones do weird stuff at night. That was the end of it, as far as she was concerned. I tried to let it go. For a few days, I managed. I told myself I'd half woken up, opened the camera without remembering, and caught some random artifact. Stress, lack of sleep, nothing more. Then it happened again. Same setup, same time window. I woke up just before my alarm this time, that same pressure in my chest like I'd been holding my breath for too long. My phone was on the nightstand, angled up. Camera app, open. I didn't move right away. I lay there and stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. I reached for the phone. New photo. Taken at 2:16 a.m. This one was brighter. The glow wasn't spread out anymore. It had shape now. Still soft, still pale, but more concentrated, like a patch of light hovering just out of view. The edges were uneven, almost feathered. I checked the metadata, no flash, no edits. I checked my activity log. Nothing. That day, I started paying attention to little things. The way my ears rang sometimes when the house was quiet. The way my dog, Reese, would stop mid-step and stare at the ceiling for no reason. That night, I didn't go to bed right away. I stayed up past midnight, sitting on the couch with the lights off, phone in my hand, watching the ceiling. Nothing happened. At 1:30, I started to feel stupid. I went to bed. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. exactly. Not groggy, not confused, fully awake like someone had flipped a switch. The phone was already angled. The camera was already open. This time, I didn't reach for it. I lay there, staring up, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was a faint brightness above me. Not enough to light the room, but enough that I could tell the darkness wasn't uniform anymore. It felt like the air itself was glowing, just barely. I felt pressure in my ears, like being underwater. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The room went dark. The pressure vanished. The quiet rushed back in, sharp and uncomfortable. I grabbed the phone. The photo from 2:17 showed the brightest glow yet. It filled almost the entire frame now, like something directly above the house had been there, close enough to matter. I sat up and swung my legs out of bed, breath shaking. I checked the window. The curtains were parted again. Outside, the sky was darker than it should have been for that hour. No stars, no clouds, just flat, empty black. I watched for a long time. Nothing moved. The glow never came back. It hasn't happened since. No more photos. No more camera app opening on its own. But some nights I wake up around 2, wide awake, with that same tight feeling in my chest. I don't reach for my phone anymore. I just lie there, staring at the ceiling, waiting to see if the darkness changes. I was already tense because the fog came in fast and thick, the kind that turns a familiar road into something narrow and unfamiliar. I was driving home from a late shift at the marina office, just paperwork and locking up. Nothing dramatic. It was a little after midnight. The weather app had said patchy fog, which felt like a lie. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet, and my headlights just made the fog glow white instead of helping. The road followed the edge of the marsh for a few miles before cutting inland. I'd driven it hundreds of times. I knew where the bends were without thinking about them. That night, though, everything felt slightly off, like the road was longer than usual. No wind, no rain, just this heavy, damp stillness. I rolled the window down a crack because the air inside the car felt stale, like it wasn't moving. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a darker patch in the fog right above the center of the road ahead. My brain tried to sort it into something normal. A low cloud, trick of the headlights, exhaust from a truck that had passed earlier. But as I got closer, it didn't move or swirl like fog usually does. It stayed in one place. It was shaped wrong, not sharp or defined, just solid in a way fog isn't, like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. It hovered maybe 10 or 15 feet above the pavement, centered over the lane, wide enough that it blocked the glow of my headlights behind it. I couldn't see through it. The fog around it was still bright, but that spot stayed dark. I slowed down without really deciding to. My foot just eased off the gas. The engine sounded too loud in the quiet, like it didn't belong there either. I remember thinking I should stop completely, but I didn't want to be sitting still in that fog. Something about that felt worse. As I got closer, I tried to focus on details, but there weren't any. No edges, no surface, just a dark mass hanging there, perfectly still. It didn't sway or drift. It didn't react to the car at all. No sound came from it, no sense of movement. It felt less like an object and more like a gap where something should have been. I glanced down at the dashboard for maybe half a second, checking my speed. When I looked back up, it was still there, but now it felt closer, even though I knew that didn't make sense. The distance between us hadn't changed much. The road markings rolled under my tires like normal. Everything was still working the way it should have. Then, as I reached the spot where it had been hovering, the fog thinned all at once. Not gradually, just gone, like someone had lifted a curtain. The road ahead was suddenly clear, the marsh visible again on either side, the reflective posts lining the shoulder glowing in my headlights. And the thing was gone. I passed under where it should have been, heart pounding, hands tight on the steering wheel. I checked the rearview mirror immediately, expecting to see it behind me, but there was nothing. Just an empty stretch of road disappearing into thin fog farther back. I pulled over a few hundred yards later, more out of instinct than choice. I put the car in park and sat there listening. No hum, no wind, no insects. The fog hadn't come back yet, and the night felt too open without it, like I was exposed. I got out of the car, which surprised me later when I thought about it. I'm not the kind of person who gets out of the car in the middle of nowhere at night, but something about needing to see for myself pushed me. The air was cold and smelled like salt and mud. My breath looked normal. The road surface was dry. No marks, no disturbance, nothing above me but a blank, starless sky. I stood there for maybe a minute, maybe longer. Time felt slippery. I kept expecting the fog to roll back in, or the darkness to gather again in that same spot, but it didn't. Everything stayed stubbornly normal. I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. The fog returned a mile later, just as thick as before, like it had been waiting. I didn't see anything else on the drive, but I kept glancing at the clock. At one point, I realized I didn't remember the last turn I'd taken. I knew I must have taken it because I was on the right road, but the memory just wasn't there. Not blank exactly, just missing. When I got home, the porch light was on like I'd left it. I locked the door behind me and stood in the kitchen for a while, listening to the fridge hum and the house settle. Everything sounded normal, but it all felt slightly muted, like I was hearing it through a wall. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that dark shape hanging in the fog, perfectly still, waiting for something. Waiting for me, maybe. I kept replaying the moment when the fog cleared, trying to understand how it happened so suddenly. Fog doesn't behave like that. It doesn't just stop. The next morning I drove the same road in full daylight. Clear sky, no haze at all. The marsh looked the same as it always did. No signs of anything unusual. I slowed at the spot where I thought I'd seen it, but nothing stood out. No odd landmarks, no strange feelings. Just asphalt and grass and water. I told myself it had been exhaustion, eyes playing tricks, the fog amplifying shadows. That explanation worked during the day. It didn't work at night. A few days later, I noticed my gas mileage didn't add up. The tank was lower than it should have been for the amount of driving I remembered doing. Not empty, just off enough that I noticed. I shrugged it off, but it stuck with me. I still drive that road. I don't really have a choice. But when the fog comes in heavy now, my grip tightens on the wheel, and I slow down earlier than I used to. I don't roll the window down anymore. And every time I reach that stretch by the marsh, part of me waits for the headlights to dim again, for the road ahead to fill with something darker than the fog, hanging there, silent and unmoving, exactly where it shouldn't be. The first time the motion light kicked on, I was rinsing a mug at the sink. The window over the counter faced the backyard, and the sudden white flood made the glass flare. I thought it was a raccoon. We got them a lot. I dried my hands, leaned closer, and saw nothing but the fence and the patchy grass lit up like a stage. The light shut off after about 30 seconds. I shrugged and went back to the mug. It happened again 10 minutes later. Same thing. Bright light, same corner of the yard. No movement. No sound. I watched the lights stay on, then click off again. I remember feeling annoyed more than anything. The sensor was new. I'd installed it myself after someone rummaged through a neighbor's car last winter. When it went on a third time, I grabbed my phone and opened the security app. The backyard camera fed straight to it. I scrolled back to the first alert. The clip showed the yard going from dark to bright. Nothing crossed the frame. No animals, no shadows, no bugs flying close to the lens, just the light snapping on and the grass glowing, then off. I replayed it twice, then checked the second clip. Same thing. I stepped outside onto the back porch. It was late spring, cool but not cold, clear sky, no wind. The kind of quiet where you can hear distant traffic but nothing close. I scanned the yard, then the fence line. Everything looked normal. I stood there long enough that the porch light turned off on its own. That's when the backyard light came on again. It lit up the yard right in front of me. I flinched and looked straight at the spot where the sensor was aimed. Still nothing. I waved my hand slowly. No change. I stepped forward. The light stayed on. I stepped back, stayed on. After a while, it shut off. I felt stupid standing there, but I stayed another minute, looking up this time. The sky was dark and clear, stars sharp, no clouds, no planes. I went back inside. Around midnight, I was half asleep on the couch when my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I didn't get up right away. I just opened the app and watched the live feed. The light was on again. Yard empty. As I watched, something flickered at the top edge of the frame. It was so quick, I thought it was a glitch. I scrubbed back and slowed it down. For 2 frames, the sky brightened. Not like lightning. More like someone took a dim photo and turned the exposure up. The brightness didn't spill onto the fence or the ground. It was just there, above the yard. Then it was gone. I checked the timestamp. Same second the motion alert triggered. The next night, it happened again. Same time, just after midnight. Motion alert, light on, empty yard, brief flash above the fence line, high enough that the camera barely caught it. I didn't go outside that time. I sat on the couch, lights off, watching the live feed. The light stayed on longer than usual, then clicked off. I slept badly and woke up with that dull, wired feeling like I hadn't really rested. By the 4th night, I started waiting for it. I made coffee around 11 and sat at the table with my phone face up. The house felt different at night now, too quiet. Even the fridge sounded loud. At 12:07 a.m., the phone buzzed. The light came on. The yard was empty. I watched the sky above the fence. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then the faint flash came again. This time it lasted longer, maybe half a second. The brightness wasn't uniform. It had a soft edge, like light diffused through fog, but there was no fog. The camera didn't adjust or refocus. It just showed the sky brightening, then returning to normal. No sound, no reflection. The yard itself didn't change at all. I realized my heart was pounding. I hadn't noticed until then. I checked the rest of the footage frame by frame. No movement, no object, just the light and the flash. The next day, I mentioned it to my sister on the phone. I kept it casual, told her the motion sensor was acting weird. She joked about ghosts and told me to reset it. I did, twice. Changed the sensitivity, adjusted the angle, cleaned the camera lens. That night, the light still came on. The flash still happened. On the 6th night, I went outside again. I stood in the yard before midnight, phone in my pocket, just listening. Crickets. A dog barking far away. Everything normal. When the light came on, it startled me, even though I was waiting for it. I looked straight up this time. I didn't see the flash directly. What I noticed instead was the absence of stars in one small patch overhead. Like something darker than the sky was there, blocking them. It wasn't sharp-edged, more like a smudge. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. Then the stars came back, and the yard went dark as the light clicked off. I don't know how long I stood there after that, long enough that my legs started to ache. I went inside and locked the door, which I hadn't been doing before. The camera caught the flash anyway. Same timing, same place. After that, I stopped going into the yard at night. I started closing the blinds earlier. The light kept triggering for another week. Always after midnight. Always with that faint, quick brightening in the sky. No footage ever showed anything else. Then one night, it didn't happen. I stayed up late, waiting. Midnight came and went. Nothing. I checked the app anyway. No alerts. I slept through the night for the first time in days. It hasn't happened since. The motion light still works. It turns on when I take the trash out or when a cat cuts through the yard. The camera picks those up just fine. But sometimes, when I'm washing a mug at the sink late at night, I catch myself glancing up the sky through the window, checking that the stars all look the way they should. I sat on the old wooden bench near the boat ramp because my legs were tired and the lake was calm in a way that felt earned. It was late evening, that soft stretch before full dark when the air cooled off, but the bugs hadn't completely committed yet. I had walked the trail around the north side after work, the same loop I'd done 100 times. Same water, same reeds, same smell of damp leaves and algae. Nothing about the night felt special. I tossed a pebble into the water and watched the ripples spread until they disappeared. The surface was mostly smooth, reflecting the dim orange band of sky and a few early stars. I leaned back and checked my phone, saw I had no new messages, and put it face down beside me. That was when I noticed the light in the water. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from behind me, maybe a car on the road above the trees. But it wasn't jittery or broken like reflections usually are. It was clean. A single soft glow, pale and white, moving slowly under the surface like something dragging a flashlight through the lake. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring straight down at it. The water didn't ripple around it. No bubbles, no disturbance at all. The light slid in a straight line, steady and unhurried, about 20 feet out from shore. I looked up to check the sky. There was nothing there. No drone, no plane, no helicopter. The clouds were thin and high, drifting east. The tree line on the opposite shore was dark and still. I turned back to the water, expecting the light to be gone. It wasn't. It kept moving, same speed, same brightness. I stood up slowly, my knee popping louder than I wanted, and stepped closer to the edge. Gravel crunched under my shoe. Still no reaction from the lake. The glow didn't change direction or fade. It didn't even seem to notice me. I remember thinking how wrong it felt that there was no reflection above it. The water was acting like a window instead of a mirror. I pulled my phone up and opened the camera. The screen showed the lake just fine, dark and grainy. The glow was there too, clear as anything. I didn't zoom. I didn't want to mess it up. I just held the phone steady and let it record. The light stopped. It didn't slow down, it just stopped. Dead still, directly in front of me. I stood there with my arm out, phone humming faintly in my hand, and waited. I don't know what I expected. A splash, a surge upward, something dramatic. Instead, the glow dimmed slightly, like someone turning a dial a fraction of an inch, and then continued on its path as if nothing had happened. That was the first moment I felt watched. Not from the water, from everywhere else. The woods behind me were suddenly too quiet. The insects had gone patchy, buzzing in short bursts instead of their steady chorus. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trail, the trees, the parking lot beyond the hill. Everything looked normal, empty. When I turned back, the glow had moved farther out, deeper into the lake, where the water darkened into something you couldn't see the bottom of during the day. The light kept going anyway, slipping into that darkness without getting weaker. My phone vibrated once. Not a notification, just a single buzz, like it had lost and regained signal. The recording timer on the screen jumped forward by several seconds. I hadn't moved. I checked the time. It was later than it should have been. Not by hours, just enough to make me frown and do the math twice. The light vanished without drama, no flare, no fade. One frame it was there, the next it wasn't. The lake went back to being a lake. Reflections returned. The water looked shallow again. I stood there for a long time after that, listening to the bugs slowly find their rhythm again. My hands felt cold even though the air wasn't. When I finally sat back down, my legs were shaky in a way that felt delayed, like my body was catching up to something my head hadn't processed yet. I watched the water until it was too dark to see anything at all. On the walk home, every sound made me turn. A deer crashing through brush nearly sent me out of my skin. When I reached my yard, I stopped and looked up at the sky, half expecting to see something hovering there, mirrored and quiet. Nothing was. Inside, I plugged my phone in and watched the video. The footage showed exactly what I remembered: the glow, the stop, the movement. But there was a stretch in the middle where the image warped slightly, like heat distortion, even though it was a cool night and the phone had been steady in my hand. The timestamp jumped there too. I watched it 3 times, then locked the phone and set it face down on the counter. I didn't delete it. I didn't send it to anyone. I just stood in the kitchen, listening to the fridge hum and the house settle. Later, lying in bed, I kept thinking about how the light moved in a straight line, unconcerned with depth or distance or anything that should have mattered. How it felt less like something passing through the lake and more like the lake had briefly revealed something that was already there. At some point, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up with the sense that I had dreamed the whole thing. The daylight made it feel smaller, easier to dismiss. On my way to work, I drove past the lake and glanced over out of habit. The water was calm, empty, normal. But as I rounded the bend, I noticed the surface brighten for just a second, like something far below had shifted position. Then it was gone. The radio cut to static right as the light turned red. Not the quick crackle you get driving under power lines, but a flat, empty hiss, like someone had muted the world and left the volume up. I reached over and tapped the power button, thinking the unit had frozen, but nothing changed. Then a low tone slid in under the static. Not loud, just steady. A single note that felt like it was sitting behind my eyes instead of in my ears. I took my foot off the gas and let the car roll the last few feet to the line. It was late, a little after 11 p.m., and I was on Cedar Hollow Road, the one with the 4-way intersection by the closed hardware store and the old diner that never reopened after the fire. Fog had rolled in earlier, thin but persistent, turning every streetlight into a fuzzy halo. I remember thinking the night felt quieter than usual. No insects, no distant traffic hum, just my engine and that tone. I looked up when the tone dipped slightly, like it was breathing. Above the intersection, maybe 20 or 30 feet up, there was a dim light. Not bright, not sharp. It was the color of a match seen through frosted glass. It hovered there for less than a second. No movement, no flicker, just present. Then it was gone. At the exact moment it vanished, the tone stopped. The radio snapped back to the song that had been playing before, mid-chorus, like nothing had happened. The fog looked the same. The streetlight hummed. My dashboard clock hadn't changed. The light turned green. I sat there long enough for someone behind me to honk. I drove the rest of the way home on autopilot, checking the rear view every few seconds without knowing why. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. It felt too small, too easy to explain away if I tried hard enough. Electrical interference, fatigue, some reflection in the fog. That's what I told myself while brushing my teeth, while locking the door, while lying in bed listening to the house settle. But the next night, it happened again. Same intersection, same time window. This time I was ready. I turned the radio off before I got there. I slowed down well before the light, heart thumping harder than it should have. The fog was thicker, pooling low to the ground. The light went red. The tone started anyway. It didn't come from the radio. The speakers were silent. I could feel it in my chest, like standing near a generator. My teeth buzzed faintly. I looked up. The light was there again, in the same spot. Same size, same dull color. It didn't cast a shadow. It didn't reflect off the windshield. It didn't seem to interact with anything at all. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, but by the time I unlocked it, the light was gone. The tone cut off so abruptly it made my ears ring. The radio stayed off. The light turned green. I drove through the intersection and pulled over a block later, breathing hard, checking the video I'd accidentally recorded of my lap and the steering wheel. No sound, no glow, just me swearing under my breath. I took a different route home after that. Longer, darker, but it felt safer. Except the third night, the tone found me anyway. I was stopped at a different light, closer to my place, when the static crept in again. This time it didn't replace the music. It slid underneath it, warping the sound until the song slowed and bent like a tape dragged across a magnet. I slapped the radio off and the static kept going. I looked around, no light this time, just fog and empty sidewalks. The tone followed me all the way home, fading only when I pulled into my driveway. The second I shut the engine off, the night rushed back in. Crickets. A distant car. Normal sound. I barely slept. Over the next week, patterns started to form whether I wanted them to or not. The tone only happened when I was stopped. Red lights, stop signs, idling in traffic. It never started while I was moving. The light always appeared overhead, never close enough to touch, never far enough to feel like a star. It never stayed long. I tried not to look up after the fourth time. I kept my eyes forward, hands clenched on the wheel, telling myself that if I didn't see it, it couldn't be real. The tone still came. It seemed to last longer when I refused to look. One night, at the same intersection as the first time, the tone didn't stop when the light turned green. I drove anyway. The moment the car rolled forward, the tone slid higher like a pressure change in an airplane cabin. My vision blurred at the edges. The fog ahead of me glowed faintly, not lit from within, but washed thin, like something bright had just passed through it and left a residue. I don't remember crossing the intersection. The next clear memory I have is braking hard 2 blocks later, my heart hammering, my hands numb. The radio was off, the tone was gone. The clock said 11:47. I checked my phone. I had left work at 11:12. The drive usually took 10 minutes. I started paying attention to time after that, writing it down, taking photos of my dashboard, setting my phone to record audio when I drove at night. Nothing ever showed up in the recordings, no static, no tone, just road noise and my breathing. But the gaps kept happening, always short. 2 minutes, 3 at most, always when the tone appeared. I told my sister Mara about it over coffee one morning, leaving out the parts that made it sound insane. I talked about losing time, about zoning out at lights. She asked if I was sleeping enough, if work was stressing me out. She suggested I see a doctor. I almost believed her until the night she rode with me. We were coming back from the grocery store, bags in the back seat, when we hit a red light on Oak Ridge. I hadn't even noticed the intersection before the static started. Mara frowned and tapped the radio. Is it broken? The tone slid in. She went quiet. I didn't look up. I didn't want to know if the light was there. Do you hear that? She asked. I nodded. The car felt heavier, like the air had thickened around it. My ears rang. The static drowned out everything else. Mara whispered my name. I glanced up despite myself. The light hovered above us, closer than before. Close enough that I could see its edges weren't sharp. They wavered like heat shimmer, except there was no warmth. Just a sense of pressure, like something leaning down. Mara sucked in a breath. That's not. The light vanished. The tone stopped. The radio came back on at full volume, making us both jump. The light turned green. We sat there until someone honked. Mara didn't say anything the rest of the drive. When we got to my place, she hugged me too tightly and told me to call her if it happened again. She didn't try to explain it. That scared me more than anything. It's been months now. I still drive that road sometimes. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wants proof that it was real. Maybe part of me hopes it'll stop if I face it. The tone hasn't come back as often. The light hasn't appeared in weeks. But every now and then when I'm stopped at a red light late at night, the world goes a little quieter than it should. The air feels thin. The radio hisses faintly, even when it's off. And I keep my eyes forward, waiting for the light to change, telling myself not to look up. I woke up already sitting halfway up in bed, heart racing, convinced someone had been standing right next to me, not leaning in, not moving. Just there. The room was dark in that soft way it gets right before dawn, when the streetlights are still on but the sky has started to thin out. My dog, Milo, was curled up at my feet, completely still. He hadn't barked. That bothered me more than anything. I stayed frozen for a few seconds, listening. No footsteps, no breathing, just the low hum of the fridge from the kitchen and the faint tick of the wall clock. I finally reached over and clicked the bedside lamp on. Nothing. The room looked exactly the same as when I'd gone to sleep. Dresser, closet door half open, shoes by the wall. I rubbed my face and told myself it was just one of those half dreams. I'd been having trouble sleeping lately anyway. New shift at work, too much caffeine, all that. I swung my legs out of bed, and that's when I noticed the curtains. They were pulled closed like always, but the bottom edge was slightly puffed inward, like something warm had been pressed against them from the outside. I reached out without really thinking and touched the fabric. It was warm. Not sun warm, not radiator warm. Just evenly warm, like it had been held near a vent. I pulled my hand back fast, suddenly wide awake. The window behind the curtain was closed and locked. I checked that first. Then I pulled the curtain aside. My backyard looked normal. Fence, old oak tree, patchy grass, the neighbor's shed. No lights, no movement. The sky above was still dark with that washed-out gray hint near the horizon. I pressed my palm to the glass. It was cool. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Milo finally lifted his head and looked at me, tail thumping once against the mattress. He didn't seem scared. That helped a little. I shut the curtain, turned the lamp off, and lay back down, telling myself I'd imagined the warmth. I didn't sleep again. By the time my alarm went off at 6, I felt like I'd been awake all night. I made coffee, scrolled my phone, and tried not to think about it. The curtains felt normal in the daylight. Cold, even. I went to work, got through my shift, and almost convinced myself it was over. That night, I didn't close the curtains. I live in a small subdivision outside of town. The kind with identical houses and narrow streets and too many porch lights. From my bedroom window, I can see the street and the tops of a few houses across the way. It was cloudy, low clouds that reflected the city glow just enough to make the sky look bruised. I lay in bed with the lights off, Milo curled against my side, phone in my hand. Around 11:30, I started to feel that same sense of pressure I'd felt when I woke up the night before. Not fear exactly, more like awareness. Like when someone is staring at you and you just know. I sat up slowly and looked toward the window. The street was empty, no cars, no people, but the light outside seemed wrong. The porch lights and street light were still on, but there was an extra brightness, like the air itself was itself. It wasn't coming from any one direction. Milo raised his head and let out a low whine. That's when I noticed the curtains moving. They weren't blowing. There was no breeze. They were lifting gently inward, the way they had the night before, except this time I was watching it happen. I got out of bed and crossed the room, every step feeling heavier than it should have. I touched the curtain again. Warm, not hot, not burning, just warm enough to feel intentional. I pulled the curtain aside. For a split second, I thought I was looking at fog. Then I realized it wasn't moving like fog. It was hanging there just outside the window, filling the yard from fence to fence. Not thick, not opaque, more like a distortion, as if the air itself had been smudged. And there was a light in it, not a beam, not a spotlight, just a soft, pale glow that didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. It didn't reflect off the glass. It didn't cast shadows. It just existed. I stood there staring, my brain scrambling for something normal to compare it to. A drone, a reflection, some kind of weird weather thing. None of it fit. The glow shifted slightly, drifting upward. As it did, the warmth on the curtain faded. The light thinned out and then it was gone, like someone had slowly turned down a dimmer switch. The yard snapped back to normal. Dark, empty, quiet. I stood there for a long time, waiting for the fear to hit. It didn't. Mostly I felt confused and very alone. I checked my phone. No notifications, no missed calls. The time read 11:42. I realized then that I couldn't remember the last few minutes clearly. I knew I'd been lying in bed. I knew I'd stood up. Everything in between felt blurred. The next morning, I found something else. My phone's camera app was open. I never leave it open. The most recent photo was taken at 11:39 p.m. It was just a picture of my ceiling. Dark, grainy. Except in one corner, there was a faint glow, barely visible, like light bleeding through from another room. I didn't take that photo, I'm sure of it. I stayed with my sister that night. Didn't tell her why. Just said I didn't feel great being alone. She joked about ghosts. I laughed along. Nothing happened there. I went back home the next day. Everything looked normal. The curtains were cold. The yard was empty. Milo acted like nothing had ever happened. I still sleep with the curtains open. Sometimes, late at night, I think the room feels quieter than it should, like sound hasn't fully come back yet. When that happens, I don't look at the window. I just wait for it to pass. I was standing in my driveway taking the trash out when I noticed the light. It was already late, around 11:30, one of those clear nights where the air felt cool but not cold. I live on the edge of a small town in eastern Washington where the houses thin out and turn into fields pretty fast. At night, there isn't much light pollution, which is something I've always liked. You get used to looking up. The light didn't flash or blink, it just slid into view from the west, moving slower than a plane but faster than a satellite. At first, I assumed that's what it was, a satellite catching the sun at the right angle. I leaned against my car and watched it drift. What caught my attention was how smooth it looked. Not just steady, but clean. No flicker, no change in brightness. It looked like someone dragging a dot across the sky with a mouse. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds before it stopped. Not slowed down, not curved, it just stopped. I remember saying out loud, "That's weird," like saying it would make it less so. The light hung there, perfectly still. I checked my surroundings without really thinking about it, like my brain wanted to make sure I wasn't about to be embarrassed by someone else seeing me stare at the sky. The road was empty. My neighbor's porch light was on, but their windows were dark. No wind, no sound besides the faint hum from the highway a few miles away. The light stayed there long enough that my initial curiosity turned into a tight feeling in my chest. I started trying to come up with explanations. Drone, maybe. Military stuff. We're not that far from training airspace. Then it dropped. Straight down. No angle. No arc. Just down, like someone pulled it by a string. It vanished behind the line of trees south of my house in less than a second. I stood there longer than I want to admit, staring at the spot where it disappeared. Nothing followed. No sound, no explosion. The sky went back to looking normal, like it hadn't just done something impossible. I went inside and locked the door, which felt stupid because I always lock it anyway. I stood in my kitchen for a minute, listening. The house sounded the same as it always did. Refrigerator cycling. Clock ticking. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I checked local news, social media, anything. Nothing. No reports. No comments about strange lights. I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. A few days later, I was driving home from work just after sunset. I work in a warehouse in town, and my shift ends late. The road home cuts through farmland for about 10 minutes before it hits residential streets. As I drove, I noticed my radio fading in and out, which isn't unusual in that stretch. Then the static shifted into a low, steady tone. Not loud, just enough to notice. It sounded like feedback, but cleaner. The hair on my arms stood up. I glanced at the sky out of habit more than fear, and that's when I saw it again. Same light, same brightness. This time, it was ahead of me, hovering just above the horizon. It didn't illuminate anything around it. The fields stayed dark. The road stayed dark. As I slowed down, the tone on the radio got louder. I didn't stop the car, but I took my foot off the gas. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my chest. The light didn't move until I did. When I slowed, it stayed put. When I crept forward, it drifted backward, maintaining the same distance. The radio tone cut out abruptly as the light dipped down, just enough to disappear behind the land. The radio went back to music mid-song, like nothing had happened. I pulled over a mile later and sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. After that, small things started happening. My phone battery would drain overnight, even when it was plugged in. I'd wake up and find apps open that I didn't remember using. Once, my step counter showed over 3,000 steps between 2 and 3 a.m. I live alone. I sleep light. I didn't remember being awake. I installed a cheap security camera facing my backyard. For a week, nothing happened. Then one night around 1:47 a.m., it sent a motion alert. The clip showed nothing but a brief wash of pale light across the grass, like a camera exposure glitch. The light lasted less than a second. The next night, same time, same flash. I started sleeping with the curtains closed. About a week later, I woke up just before dawn with a deep pressure in my ears, like I just stepped off a plane. There was a low hum in the air, so faint it felt more like a vibration in my chest than a sound. I lay there, frozen, staring at the ceiling. The hum stopped the moment I sat up. The silence that followed felt wrong, too empty. like sound itself was lagging behind reality. After a few seconds, normal noise crept back in, distant cars, the house settling. I checked my phone. The camera app was open. The most recent photo was time-stamped 4:12 a.m. It showed my ceiling, washed in a faint glow that I didn't remember seeing. That morning, my neighbor Mark asked if everything was okay. He said he'd seen me standing in my backyard before sunrise, just staring up. He waved. I didn't respond. I told him I must have been letting the dog out. I don't have a dog. The last time it happened was the worst. I was walking home from a friend's place just after midnight. The air was still, warm for the time of year. I took the longer route through a path that runs alongside a drainage field. As I walked, I noticed a faint clicking sound above me, rhythmic and steady. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked, it resumed. I reached a streetlight and stepped under it. The clicking cut out instantly. I looked up, heart racing. The sky was empty. I didn't look back the rest of the way home. I still go to work, I still sleep. I don't see the light every night. But sometimes when I'm outside and the sky is clear, I get the feeling that if I look up at the wrong moment, I'll see it again, waiting, perfectly still, just above where I can explain it. And I don't know what scares me more, that it might come back or that one day it won't. The trail went quiet so suddenly that I thought my hearing had cut out. 1 second there were birds arguing somewhere uphill, bugs buzzing in the brush, the faint scrape of my boots on gravel. The next, nothing. No wind in the trees. No insects. Even my own breathing sounded wrong, like it was happening inside my head instead of the open air. I stopped walking without really deciding to. The silence felt heavy, like pressure in my ears when you're underwater. I remember thinking it was too early in the morning for this kind of stillness. It was just after sunrise, cold enough that my breath still fogged, but bright enough that the forest should have been waking up. I was hiking alone in the Cascades, a familiar trail I'd done dozens of times. It was my usual Saturday thing. I lived in Wenatchee then, worked a boring job at a logistics office, and hiking was how I burned off the restlessness. I told people it was for fitness, but mostly I liked being somewhere without phone service and other people. That morning, everything looked normal. Pines, wet ground from overnight drizzle, patches of fog still clinging low between the trees. The silence was the only thing that didn't fit. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, waiting for the forest to start back up again. Sometimes animals freeze when they sense something, and I figured maybe a predator had passed through. A cougar or a bear, maybe. The thought made my shoulders tighten, but I didn't feel panicked, just alert. Then I noticed the shimmer. It was ahead of me on the trail, maybe 30 yards out, right where the path bent around a cluster of rocks. At first, I thought it was mist catching the light, or heat distortion rising off wet stone. But it wasn't moving the way fog moves. It hung there, thin and uneven, like the air itself had been wrinkled. I took a step forward, slow and deliberate. My boot hit the ground and made almost no sound. That scared me more than the silence had. The shimmer didn't react. It stayed in place, faint but obvious now that I was looking straight at it. The edges weren't sharp. They wavered, like something you'd see at the edge of your vision if you stared too long at the sun. Except this was directly in front of me. I remember thinking very clearly that I didn't want to walk into it. I don't know why that thought came so fast and so strong. I've walked through fog, smoke, dust storms. I've never had a physical reaction to distorted air before. But this felt wrong in a way that bypassed logic. My stomach tightened and my hands went cold inside my gloves. I checked my watch out of habit. It was still ticking. Normal time. No skipped seconds. That detail sticks with me because I remember being weirdly relieved by it. I called out, "Hey," feeling stupid the moment I did. My voice didn't echo, it didn't carry, it just sort of stopped, like the sound got absorbed before it could travel. That was when the fear really started to creep in. Not a rush of panic, but that slow realization that you're somewhere you shouldn't be. The shimmer shifted then, not away from me, not toward me. It sagged, like fabric losing tension, and for a split second I thought I saw depth behind it. Not a shape, not a figure. Just more space than should have been there. My ears rang softly, the way they do after a loud noise, except there hadn't been one. The pressure in my head increased, and I had to swallow a few times like I was on an airplane descending too fast. I took a step back. The moment my foot moved, the forest exhaled. Birds started up all at once, not gradually, but like someone had flipped a switch. Insects buzzed. Wind stirred the branches. The normal sounds came crashing back so fast it made me flinch. The shimmer ahead of me thinned, pulled upward, and dissolved into nothing like breath on cold glass. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at empty air. I didn't move for a long time. I kept waiting for something else to happen, for the silence to drop again, for the shimmer to come back. Nothing did. The trail looked ordinary. Damp dirt, scattered needles, the same bend in the path I'd seen 100 times. Eventually, I turned around and walked back the way I'd come. I told myself it was a weird atmospheric thing. Temperature inversion, light refraction, whatever. I'm not a scientist, but I know the brain fills in gaps when it's stressed. I stuck to that explanation all the way back to the trailhead. By the time I got to my car, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. Then I noticed my phone. It had been fully charged when I started. I always check before hiking. Now it was at 62%. That wasn't impossible, but it didn't make sense either. I hadn't used it at all. No music, no GPS, just airplane mode in my pocket. I unlocked it to check the time, and that's when I saw the step count. There was a spike. A big one. According to my phone, I'd walked an extra half mile that morning that I couldn't account for. Not all at once, but in a tight cluster of steps logged within a 2-minute window. I stood there by my car, keys in my hand, staring at that screen, trying to map it onto my memory. I couldn't. There was no blank spot, no sense of missing time, just that quiet stretch of trail and the shimmer that had vanished. I drove home in silence. Over the next few weeks, little things kept bothering me. Not dramatic stuff, subtle details that didn't line up. My boots had scuff marks on the toes like I'd been scrambling over rock, but I hadn't. My left calf was sore for days, the kind of deep ache you get after overexertion. I hadn't changed my routine. I went back to the trail twice after that, once with my friend Aaron, once alone again. Nothing happened. No silence, no shimmer, just a normal forest doing normal forest things. I stopped hiking alone after that, not consciously, but gradually. I found excuses. Work got busy. Weather wasn't great. I started sticking to crowded trails closer to town. I didn't tell many people what happened. When I did, I kept it vague. Weird sensory thing, I'd say. Probably my brain. Most people nodded and moved on. Aaron asked me once why I didn't go up into the Cascades anymore. I told him I'd gotten bored of it. He didn't push. The thing that finally made it impossible to ignore happened months later, in late fall. I was lying in bed, half asleep, listening to rain tap against the window. That same pressure settled into my ears, gentle but unmistakable. Not sound, more like the absence of it. The room felt muffled, like thick insulation had been packed into the walls. My eyes snapped open. The house was quiet, too quiet. No fridge hum, no rain, no distant traffic, just that soft ringing again. I sat up, heart racing, and the pressure vanished instantly. Sound rushed back. Rain, wind, everything normal. I lay there for a long time afterwards, staring at the ceiling, not daring to close my eyes again. Nothing else has happened since. Not like that, anyway. I still think about that shimmer sometimes. About the way the air looked stretched thin, like something heavy had passed through it and left an imprint. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it noticed me or if I just wandered too close to something that didn't care whether I was there or not. All I know is that the forest went silent, and for a moment it felt like the world had paused around me. And I haven't trusted quiet places the same way since. The power went out while I was rinsing a mug in the sink. Everything just cut at once, no flicker, no warning, like someone had flipped a switch on the whole street. The kitchen dropped into this flat gray darkness, not pitch black, just dim enough that I could still see the counter edges. I stood there for a second, listening. No fridge hum, no AC. Even the distant highway noise seemed muted. I walked to the front window, wiping my hands on my jeans. A few houses down, I saw porch lights go dark one by one like they were all connected. Mrs. Calder's place across the street disappeared completely except for the pale rectangle of her living room window, where she still had candles burning. She always did that during outages. I checked my phone. No signal bars. Battery was fine, but everything felt delayed, like the screen brightness wasn't quite right. That's when I noticed the sky. It wasn't dark in the way a night sky usually was. It had this dull, silvery look to it, like someone had laid a thin sheet of metal over everything. No stars, no clouds, just this even, colorless glow stretching from horizon to horizon. At first, I thought it was light pollution doing something weird without the streetlights on. But the glow wasn't coming from below. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I stepped out onto the porch. The air felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm, but it was warm and still. No wind, no insects, no barking dogs. The entire street was quiet. I walked down the steps and onto the sidewalk, craning my neck back. The sky didn't move. It didn't pulse or shimmer. It just sat there, flat and wrong, like a ceiling too low overhead. A car was stopped in the middle of the intersection at the end of the block. The driver's side door was open, and a guy I didn't recognize was standing half in the road, staring straight up with his hands on his hips. I called out to him, but my voice sounded small and swallowed, like it didn't travel. He didn't respond. I took a few steps closer, and that's when the feeling hit me. Not fear exactly, more like awareness. Like something had shifted, and I was suddenly aware of being noticed. Not by a person, but by the situation itself. Like when you realize you're being watched on a security camera, you can't see. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The clock on the lock screen was stuck at 10:47. I don't know how long the sky stayed like that. It could have been seconds, it could have been minutes. There was no sense of time passing. My thoughts felt slow, like wading through thick water. Then, without any buildup, the glow faded. Not downward or outward, just gone. The sky snapped back to normal darkness, stars blinking back into place like they'd been waiting. At the same moment, every porch light on the street came back on. The car at the intersection lurched forward, its headlights flaring like the driver had slammed the gas without meaning to. Somewhere a dog started barking, frantic and high-pitched. I realized I was holding my breath. I went back inside. The microwave clock was blinking 12. My phone buzzed all at once with missed notifications, like it had been buffering reality and finally caught up. I sat on the couch and waited for the adrenaline to fade, telling myself it was a weird outage, some atmospheric thing, maybe my brain filling in gaps. That worked for about 5 minutes. Then I noticed the time. The clock on the stove said 11:03. I checked my phone. Same thing. I knew it had been 10:47 when I first looked. I remembered the number clearly because it was close to the hour, and I'd thought about just going to bed early. I scrolled through my messages. There was a text from my sister sent at 10:55 asking if my power was out too. I didn't remember getting it. I didn't remember hearing the phone vibrate. I didn't answer it. I went to bed eventually, but sleep didn't come easily. Every small sound made me tense. The house felt too quiet, like it had lost its background noise and never quite got it back. Sometime during the night, I woke up sweating. The room was dark, but not fully. There was a faint glow leaking through the curtains, not bright enough to light the room, just enough to outline the dresser and the door frame. I lay there, heart pounding, listening. Nothing. No hum, no wind, no insects, just pressure. That was the only way I could describe it. Like the air itself was pressing down on me, not painfully, just insistently. I rolled onto my side and reached for my phone. The screen was already on, camera app open, pointed straight up. I sat bolt upright. The glow outside vanished instantly, like it had been cut off. Sound rushed back into the room all at once, the AC kicking on, a car passing somewhere far away, the faint buzz of electricity in the walls. My ears rang like I just stood up too fast. I looked at the phone again. There was one photo taken at 2:14 a.m. It showed my ceiling, and in the center of the frame, barely visible, was a soft silvery haze. Not a shape, not a reflection. Just a patch of light that didn't belong there. I checked the file info. No flash, no movement, just that single image. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, everything looked normal. The sky was blue, birds were loud. Mrs. Calder waved at me while watering her plants like nothing unusual had happened. I asked her if she'd noticed the sky during the outage. She frowned and said, "What do you mean?" I didn't push it. The photo is still on my phone. I haven't shown it to anyone. Every time I look at it, I get that same sense of pressure, like my body remembers something my mind doesn't. Sometimes late at night, when the house goes quiet again, I'll catch myself listening. Not for a sound, but for the absence of one. like I'm waiting for the sky to go flat and metallic again. I was halfway down Linden Avenue when I noticed my shadow wasn't lining up right. It was late, a little after midnight, and the street was empty, in that way suburban streets get when everyone's lights are off and even the porch bugs have given up. I was walking home from my friend Mark's place, hands shoved in my hoodie pockets, replaying a dumb argument we'd had about nothing important. It was cool out, not cold, just enough to keep me moving at a steady pace. The streetlights along Linden are spaced pretty far apart. They're those older yellow ones that buzz faintly if you stand under them long enough. I was coming up on one of the darker stretches between lights when I saw my shadow stretch forward, way farther than it should have. At first, I assumed it was just the angle. I slowed down a little, glanced at the pavement. My shadow was long, thin, and pointed, reaching almost to the next driveway. Longer than the light behind me could possibly cast. I stopped walking. The shadow didn't. It kept stretching for half a second more, like it had momentum, then snapped back to where it should have been. Normal, right under my feet. At the same moment, the air above the street brightened. Not like a flash, more like someone slowly turning a dimmer switch up and then back down again. A soft, pale glow rolled over the houses and trees, lasted maybe 2 seconds, then faded out. Everything went quiet. I don't mean silent. There were still distant highway sounds, a dog barking somewhere, but it felt like the space around me had emptied, like the air was thinner. I stood there for a bit, heart going faster than it should have, staring up at the sky. There were clouds, low and gray, moving slowly east. No helicopters, no planes, no stars. I told myself it was nothing. Light pollution, a transformer somewhere. My eyes adjusting. I started walking again, faster this time. 2 blocks later, it happened again. This time, I was ready for it, which somehow made it worse. I watched my shadow creep ahead of me, stretching across the sidewalk and onto the grass of someone's front lawn. It didn't jitter or flicker. It moved smoothly, like it was being pulled. I stopped dead. The glow came back, faint but broader this time. The tops of the trees lit up, leaves catching light from above instead of the street lights below. It wasn't bright enough to cast new shadows, just enough to make everything look flat and colorless, like the saturation had been turned down. Then it was gone. Shadow normal, street normal. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. A few houses had lights on inside, but no one was outside. No doors opening, no voices. I pulled my phone out and checked the time. 12:47 a.m. No missed calls, no notifications. Battery was fine. I kept walking, but now I was paying attention to everything. Every sound, every change in light. My shoulders were tight, like I was bracing for something to hit me from behind. The third time it happened was at the intersection near the elementary school. I was crossing the street when my shadow suddenly stretched sideways, not forward. It slid across the asphalt toward the school fence, elongated and distorted, like it was being dragged by something I couldn't see. I froze in the middle of the road. The glow this time wasn't above me. It was everywhere at once. The whole intersection took on that same dull, washed-out brightness. The reflective paint on the road lines looked flat instead of shiny. Even the red stop sign looked gray. I felt a pressure in my ears, the kind you get when an elevator stops too fast. Then, gone. The streetlight buzzed back into focus. Colors snapped back. My shadow dropped into place like nothing had happened. I finished crossing the street and leaned against the school fence, breathing harder than I meant to. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out wrong. I stayed there for a few minutes, watching the sky. Nothing else happened. When I finally got home, I double-checked the locks, even though I always do. Inside, the house felt normal, too normal. The hum of the fridge, the faint tick of the thermostat, my dog lifting his head from his bed and thumping his tail once before going back to sleep. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening, I walked the same route again, earlier this time, just after sunset. I told myself I was proving something, though I wasn't sure what. Nothing happened. No stretching shadows, no glow. By the 4th night, I was starting to think I'd imagined it. Stress, being tired, my brain playing tricks. Then, about a week later, I was walking home again. Same time as before, when my phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Carla. Hey, it said. Random question, were you outside just now? I stopped under a streetlight and typed back, yeah. Walking home. Why? There was a pause before she replied. Thought so. Your shadow looked weird. I stared at the screen. What do you mean? I typed. Another pause. Longer this time. It was like it was reaching ahead of you, she wrote. Probably just the light. I didn't reply. I just stood there, looking down at the pavement. My shadow was perfectly normal. Above me, behind the clouds, something faint shifted, just enough to make the sky seem lighter for a moment. Then everything settled back into place. I woke up because my wrist felt tight, like the band on my watch had twisted while I slept. I was half dreaming, still foggy, and the first thing I noticed was the glow. Not the screen glow. The room itself felt faintly lit, like there was a streetlight too close to the window. That didn't make sense because my bedroom faces the backyard, and the nearest light is a good 100 yards away by the road. I rolled onto my side and checked the time, 2:17 a.m. The watch buzzed once, the way it does when it reconnects after losing signal. That's when I saw the activity alert. It showed 6 minutes of walking logged between 2:03 and 2:09. A neat little spike, heart rate elevated, steps counted. I stared at it, waiting for my brain to catch up and tell me it was a glitch. I live alone. I hadn't been sleepwalking since I was a kid, and even then it was rare. I hadn't felt sore or disoriented waking up. My feet weren't dirty. The back door was still locked. The motion sensor in the hallway hadn't gone off. Everything about the house felt normal except for the light. I sat up, and that was when the quiet hit me. It wasn't silence exactly. It was like the background noise had been turned down too far. No distant traffic, no hum from the fridge, no wind in the trees. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. My ears rang faintly, like after a pressure change. I went to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. The sky looked wrong. It wasn't bright like dawn or like city glow reflecting off clouds. It was evenly lit, a soft gray blue that made the backyard visible without shadows. The oak tree at the fence line looked flat, like it was cut out and pasted there. I couldn't see stars. I couldn't see clouds either. Just this smooth, dim brightness hanging over everything. I checked my phone for the weather. Clear skies, no alerts, no power outage reported. My signal bars flickered once, dropped to nothing, then came back. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to decide if I was still half asleep. That's when I noticed the time again. 2:19. 2 minutes had passed, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like I'd been standing there a lot longer. I stepped back from the window, and the light outside dimmed slightly, like someone had adjusted a dial. That scared me more than if it had vanished outright. I didn't want to think I was affecting it. I checked the rest of the house. The front door was locked. The alarm system showed nothing unusual. No alerts, no recorded motion. The back door camera feed was clear, but the image looked washed out, like the contrast had been flattened. I opened the back door anyway. Cold air rushed in, sharper than it should have been for early fall. The backyard looked the same as through the window, evenly lit with no clear source. The grass didn't move, the leaves didn't rustle. My breath fogged slightly, though the temperature reading on my phone said it was 58. I took one step onto the porch and felt it immediately. That sense you get when someone's looking at you. Not fear exactly, more like pressure behind the eyes. I glanced up without meaning to. The sky wasn't empty. There was a darker patch directly overhead. Not a shape, not something you could outline. Just an area where the light thinned, like something massive was blocking it without casting a shadow. It didn't move when I moved my head. It stayed centered. My watch buzzed again. Another reconnect vibration. I didn't look at it. I went back inside and locked the door, heart pounding now. As soon as the door shut, the quiet cracked. The fridge kicked on. A car passed somewhere in the distance. The house settled. Normal sounds rushed back in like they'd been waiting. I checked the time, 2:41 a.m. I don't remember the missing minutes. I don't remember standing there that long. I don't remember going back to the window or looking up again. All I know is that my watch now showed another block of activity. This one 11 minutes long, with my heart rate higher than it's ever been while exercising. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the couch with all the lights on until sunrise. When the sun came up, everything looked normal. The yard looked normal. The oak tree cast proper shadows again. Birds showed up like nothing had happened. Later that morning, I checked the camera footage more carefully. The timestamps were intact, no gaps, but at exactly 2:05 a.m. and again at 2:28 a.m., the image brightened for less than a second, like a flash with no direction. No motion triggered, no sound recorded. I called my sister, Jenna, and told her I hadn't slept well. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't want to hear it out loud yet. That night, I charged my watch and phone fully and went to bed early. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and turned off all notifications. I left the curtains open. I woke up just after 3 a.m. without any alarm. The room was dark, normal dark. The watch was still on my wrist, no activity logged. I was starting to convince myself it had been a one-off, some weird overlap of bad sensors and stress, when I noticed the sky again, not glowing this time, just brighter than it should have been. Enough that I could see the outline of the fence. I didn't get up. I stayed still, barely breathing. A minute later, the brightness faded. Not all at once. It pulled upward, like fog lifting in reverse, leaving the stars behind. I checked the watch when it was gone. No new movement logged. I didn't look outside again after that. I still wear the watch. I still live in the same house. Every once in a while, I wake up with that pressure behind my eyes and the sense that I missed something important. The data doesn't always show it, but sometimes my watch buzzes in the middle of the night like it's reconnecting to something that isn't there anymore. I was sitting on the back steps because I couldn't sleep, just letting the night burn itself out. It was late enough that the houses behind mine were dark, and the only light came from the neighbor's porch 2 doors down and the thin glow from the street at the end of the block. It had been hot all day, one of those muggy late summer days where the air doesn't really cool off at night, just gets quieter. I remember checking my phone and seeing it was 1:47 a.m. I'd been doom scrolling for a while, then set it face down on the step because the screen felt too bright. The yard was still. No wind, no bugs, which I noticed only because it felt odd. Usually there's at least some chirping, even if it's faint. That's when the pressure hit. It wasn't painful. It wasn't even dramatic. It felt exactly like the moment when you dive underwater in a pool and your ears haven't caught up yet. A soft, squeezing fullness, like the air suddenly got heavier. I swallowed automatically, like you do on an airplane, and for half a second I honestly thought maybe a storm was rolling in fast. But the sky was clear. I stood up because my balance felt slightly off, like I'd gotten up too fast. The pressure lasted maybe a second, maybe two. Long enough for me to notice it wasn't normal. Then it eased, but the air didn't feel the same afterward. It felt thin, almost hollow, like the space around me had been scooped out a little. I remember saying, "What the hell," out loud, quietly, like I didn't want to wake anyone up. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't bright. That's important. It wasn't a beam or a flash or anything that lit things up. It was more like a dull glow, the color of an LED that's dying. Pale, almost grayish, moving behind the clouds that weren't there a second earlier. I realized then that there were clouds, but they were high and thin, like smudges rather than shapes. The light slid sideways between two of those smudges. Smooth, no blinking, no sound. It moved at a steady pace that didn't feel fast or slow, just deliberate. I tracked it without really meaning to, my head turning as it went. I tried to tell myself it was a plane, then I tried helicopter, then drone. None of those fit. It didn't blink, it didn't wobble, and it didn't make any noise at all. Was that not even the faint hum you sometimes hear, if the neighborhood is quiet enough? The pressure came back for just a moment as the light passed overhead. Stronger this time. My ears rang softly, like when you've been somewhere loud and step into silence too fast. The light slid behind a darker patch of cloud and vanished. Not faded, not sped up, just gone. The night snapped back into place like nothing had happened. The crickets started up again all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. A breeze brushed the leaves in the yard, light and normal. I realized my hands were clenched so hard my nails had left marks in my palms. I stood there for a long time, staring at the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I went back inside and locked the door, even though I knew how ridiculous that was. I checked the windows. I checked the back door again. Everything was normal. The house smelled the same. The fridge hummed. The clock on the microwave still read 1:47. which I thought was weird. But when I checked my phone, it said 1:49, so I chalked it up to the clock being slow. I barely slept that night. Every time I drifted off, I felt like the air in the room was shifting, even though it wasn't. When morning finally came, it felt too bright, like the contrast had been turned up. I tried to forget about it. That lasted about a day. The next night, around the same time, I felt it again while brushing my teeth. Just a soft pressure change, quick and gone. I froze with toothpaste foam in my mouth, staring at myself in the mirror, waiting. Nothing followed at that time. The third night, my phone battery dropped from 40% to 12 in the span of a few minutes while it sat untouched on the coffee table. I blamed the battery. Phones do that sometimes. Still, I charged it overnight even though it didn't really need it. On the fourth night, my neighbor Matt asked me if I'd been outside late lately. We were both taking our trash out, standing by the curb under the streetlight. He looked tired. He works early mornings and usually doesn't chat. Why? I asked. He shrugged. Thought I saw someone standing in your yard the other night, just for a second, probably just shadows. I told him I'd been out there. I didn't tell him why. That night, I sat on the back steps again. I told myself I was being stupid, but part of me needed to see if it would happen again. The air was cooler this time. A thin layer of clouds covered most of the sky, muting the stars. Nothing happened for almost an hour. Then the pressure rolled through again, softer than before, but unmistakable. The hairs on my arms lifted. Above me, the clouds brightened just slightly. Not enough to cast light on the ground, just enough that I could see their edges more clearly. The dim glow slid between them again, slower this time. It paused, just for a moment, directly overhead. I had the overwhelming feeling of being noticed, not watched exactly, but acknowledged. Like when you make eye contact with someone across a room. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost jumped out of my skin. When I pulled it out, the screen was black. Completely dead. It had been at 80% an hour earlier. The light moved again, slipping behind the clouds and disappearing. The pressure released, leaving my ears ringing faintly. The night sounds returned, but quieter this time. Hesitant. I didn't sit outside again after that. For the next week, things stayed mostly normal, except for small stuff. Electronics acting strange, my sleep tracker logging brief periods of movement in the middle of the night when I knew I hadn't gotten out of bed, the sky looking just a little too bright sometimes, like light pollution that didn't make sense. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could point to and say, this is it. I still go outside at night sometimes, but I don't sit still anymore. I keep the porch light on. I don't look straight up for too long. Every now and then, when the air goes quiet and heavy for just a second, I feel that pressure again. And I wait, holding my breath, hoping the sky stays dark. I was driving back from my sister's place just after 10. She lived about 40 minutes out, past the edge of town where the streetlights thinned out and the roads started cutting through farmland. It was late summer, still warm enough that I had the windows cracked, but the sky was overcast and heavy, like it might rain later. No moon, no stars, just dark. I'd taken that road 100 times. 2 lanes, gentle curves, nothing tricky. I was tired but not falling asleep, tired. The radio was on low, some late-night talk show I wasn't really listening to. I remember thinking about how quiet it felt out there, even with the radio on. No other cars in either direction for a while. I came around a bend where the fields opened up on both sides. Corn on the left, an empty stretch on the right where a barn used to be before it burned down years ago. As my headlights swept forward, they caught something ahead of me. Just for a second. A flash of reflection, like light bouncing off metal. It wasn't on the road. It was above it. I instinctively eased off the gas. My first thought was that it was some kind of sign or maybe debris hanging from a wire. But there were no wires there. The reflection had been too clean, too smooth. Not like when you catch a street sign or an animal's eyes. As I slowed, the reflection was gone. I rolled another 20 feet and scanned the road. Nothing. I checked my mirrors, thinking maybe it was something low and close to the car, but there was nothing behind me either. The road ahead looked normal again, just asphalt disappearing into darkness. I told myself it was probably a trick of the light. Headlights do weird things. Still, my heart was beating harder than it should have been. I turned the radio down without really meaning to. A minute later, it happened again. This time, it was clearer. My headlights caught something metallic, suspended maybe 10 or 15 feet above the road. It didn't have a shape I could lock onto. No wings, no edges I could define, just a smooth surface that reflected light like brushed steel. It wasn't glowing on its own, it only showed up when my headlights hit it. I slowed almost to a crawl. As soon as I did, it vanished. Not like it flew away, it just wasn't there anymore. No movement, no blur. 1 second it was reflecting light, the next it was just darkness. I pulled over to the shoulder and put the car in park. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening to the engine idle. The fields were dead quiet. No insects, no wind moving the corn. That struck me as odd later, but at the time I was too focused on staring straight ahead, half expecting the thing to reappear. It didn't. After about 30 seconds, I laughed under my breath, more out of nerves than anything. I told myself I was overtired. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It read 10:18. That seemed right. I drove on. The rest of the road felt wrong in a way I can't really explain. The pavement looked the same, but my sense of distance felt off, like the car wasn't moving as fast as it should have been. The radio signal faded into static, so I turned it off completely. The silence felt heavy. I kept glancing at the road ahead, waiting for that reflection. It didn't come back. Eventually, I reached the stretch where a small bridge crosses a drainage canal. There's a reflective marker there, one of those orange diamond signs warning about the curve. When my headlights hit it, I flinched hard, my foot slamming the brake before my brain caught up. I sat there breathing fast, embarrassed at myself. I crossed the bridge and kept going. When I finally reached the first set of streetlights on the edge of town, I felt a wave of relief that surprised me with how strong it was. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until then. I checked the dashboard clock again out of habit. It said 10:31. That didn't make sense. The drive from the bridge to town was maybe 5 minutes. Even with me slowing down and stopping earlier, I should have been home by then. I tried to reconstruct the timeline in my head, but it felt fuzzy, like trying to remember details of a dream. I got home a few minutes later and parked in the driveway. I sat in the car for a bit before going inside, scrolling through my phone. No missed calls, no texts, nothing unusual. My phone said 10:34. Inside, everything was normal. My cat came to greet me. The house felt the same as always. I locked the door, made a quick sandwich, and tried to shake off the feeling that something was off. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I checked the car in daylight. I don't know what I expected to find. Scratches? Maybe. Something stuck to the hood. There was nothing. The car looked exactly the same as it always did. I drove that same road again later that week during the day. Nothing unusual. No signs, no wires, no structures that could explain what I'd seen. I went back again at night a few days later, telling myself I needed to prove to myself it was nothing. It didn't happen again. But sometimes when I drive at night now, I catch myself slowing down when my headlights sweep over open space, half expecting to see that smooth, metallic reflection hanging in midair. I've never seen it since. I don't know what it was. I don't even know if it was really there. I just know my headlights reflected off something that shouldn't have been. I was halfway down the block when I first noticed the clicking. It was soft, almost polite, like someone tapping a fingernail against plastic. Not loud enough to panic over, not sharp enough to pin down. I stopped walking without really deciding to, and the sound stopped too. That's what made me pay attention. I stood there on the sidewalk, keys cold in my hand, listening to nothing. The streetlight above me hummed. Somewhere far off, a car passed on the main road. No clicking. I took another step. The clicking came back immediately. Same rhythm, same volume, but now it felt closer. Not behind me, not in front of me. Just around. I tilted my head up, scanning the trees and rooftops, and the sound cut off like someone flipped a switch. This was a quiet neighborhood, the kind built in the 70s and barely updated since. Single-story houses, chain-link fences, uneven sidewalks. I lived 4 blocks from the small marina, close enough that the air always smelled faintly of salt, even this far inland. At night, fog rolled in without warning, and tonight it was thick enough that the streetlights looked like they were floating. I told myself it was probably someone's wind chimes, or a sprinkler system. or an insect I didn't recognize. The list of normal explanations felt thinner than it should have, but I kept walking. The clicking resumed. It followed my pace perfectly. When I slowed, it slowed. When I stopped again, it stopped again. My stomach tightened in that quiet, practical way it does before your brain catches up. I glanced over my shoulder. The street behind me was empty, just fog and the dull orange glow of lights. No footsteps, no shadows moving where they shouldn't. I looked up again. Silence. This time I didn't move right away. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, staring at the low clouds, trying to catch something, anything, out of place. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. The fog shifted, but nothing else did. When I finally took a step, the clicking came from a different angle, still circling, but higher somehow. I stopped again, heart starting to pound now. The sound cut off instantly. Whatever this was, it didn't like being watched. That thought came uninvited, fully formed, and I didn't try to argue with it. I just started walking faster. The clicking kept pace. I passed the darkened house with the broken fence, then the one with the blue boat in the driveway. Every familiar landmark felt slightly off, like the spacing between things wasn't quite right. I tried to focus on my breathing, on the solid feel of the sidewalk under my shoes. Click, click, click. It wasn't random. There was a pattern to it. 3 short taps, a pause, then 3 again, over and over. I stopped under the next streetlight and looked straight up. Nothing. Just fog, glowing faintly from the light below. The clicking vanished. I stood there longer this time, waiting for it to come back on its own. It didn't. My ears rang faintly like after a loud noise, even though nothing loud had happened. I started to feel ridiculous, standing alone in the fog, staring at the sky like I'd lost something up there. I took out my phone, more for comfort than anything, and checked the time. 10:47 p.m. No missed calls, no alerts. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and started walking again. The clicking returned immediately, closer than before. I flinched, stopping so fast my heel skidded on the concrete. Silence. This time, instead of looking up, I stayed perfectly still and looked straight ahead. The fog thinned just enough that I could see the intersection at the end of the block. The stop sign. The dark shape of the eucalyptus trees lining the park beyond. Nothing moved. I took a slow step forward without lifting my head. Click. Another step. Click, click. The sound was definitely above me now. Not directly overhead, but offset, like something was moving in a wide circle, keeping its distance. I broke into a jog. The clicking sped up to match. My chest tightened, and I had the sudden, overwhelming sense that I was doing exactly what it wanted. I slowed to a walk again, then stopped completely. Silence. I stood there, hands on my knees, breathing hard. The fog pressed in from all sides, muting the world. Even the distant traffic noise was gone now. I looked up. For just a second, I thought I saw movement. Not a shape, exactly. More like the fog itself was being displaced, pushed aside by something passing through it. No lights, no outline, just a subtle shift like heat distortion without the heat. Then it was gone. The clicking didn't come back. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. I walked the rest of the way home without hearing another sound. I didn't look up again until I was inside my apartment, door locked, lights on. That night I didn't sleep much. Every small noise made me tense. The refrigerator kicking on, pipes knocking in the walls. Normal sounds, but I listened to them too closely, waiting for that pattern to emerge again. It didn't. The next morning, my neighbor Carla asked if I'd been out late. Yeah, I said. Why? She shrugged. Thought I heard something clicking outside around 11. Like, I don't know. Never mind. I asked her where she heard it. She pointed upward without thinking, then frowned like she wasn't sure why she'd done that. I didn't walk home at night for a while after that. When I eventually did, I kept my eyes forward and my pace steady. Sometimes I thought I heard something faint in the distance, but it never circled me again. What stuck with me wasn't the sound itself. It was how precisely it responded, like it was waiting for me to notice. Like the moment I looked up, the whole thing lost interest. I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't. I was sitting on the back steps with my jacket zipped up, staring at the sky because I couldn't sleep. It was late enough that the neighborhood was quiet, but not dead. Somebody's dryer thumping a block over, a car passing every now and then. The air was cold and still, the kind that makes sound travel farther than it should. I lived outside of town then, just far enough that the streetlights didn't completely drown out the stars. I'd started doing this thing where I picked one star and watched it until my eyes got tired. It helped slow my thoughts down. If you stare long enough, the sky starts to feel less huge and more like a ceiling. I picked one low in the sky, just above the tree line. It wasn't especially bright, but it stood out because it didn't twinkle much. It felt steady, solid. I remember thinking it was probably a planet, but I didn't bother checking. I watched it for a while, and so waft breathing fog into my sleeves, counting my exhales. Nothing happened at first. The night felt normal. Too normal, honestly. Then the star moved. Not fast, not sudden. It slid sideways, smooth and quiet, like someone nudging a chess piece across a board. Just a little bit at first. I thought it was my eyes, so I blinked hard and looked away at the roofline, then back. It was still drifting. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Not panic, more like confusion so deep it felt physical. Stars don't do that. Planes blink, satellites glide. This didn't glide. It adjusted, corrected itself slightly, like it was staying level with something I couldn't see. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. The wood step creaked under my boot, loud as a gunshot. The star kept moving. I whispered no under my breath, like that would somehow stop it. It slid another inch across the sky, then slowed. For a second, just one, I couldn't tell if I was looking at movement or if my brain was filling it in. The star dimmed slightly, not enough to vanish, just enough to feel thinner, and then it blended back into the sky. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't turn off, it didn't shoot away. The point of light softened, spread out, and suddenly it was just gone. Or maybe it was still there, and my eyes couldn't separate it from everything else anymore. I stood there with my mouth open, staring at the spot where it had been. The sky looked normal, completely normal. I checked other stars, comparing positions, trying to convince myself I'd picked the wrong reference point. I hadn't. My hands were shaking, not badly, but enough that I noticed. I pulled my phone out and opened a star map app, feeling stupid even as I did it. The app showed the sky exactly as it should be. No gaps, no missing points. I stayed outside another 10 minutes, then 20. Nothing else happened. The cold started to creep through my jacket, and my rational brain slowly clawed its way back in. I went inside and locked the door, which I didn't usually do that early. I stood in the kitchen for a bit, just listening. The house sounded the same as it always did. Fridge humming, pipes ticking. I told myself it was an illusion. Fatigue. Eye strain. Maybe a satellite at a weird angle. I repeated that explanation until it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. The next night, I went back out. I didn't plan to. I told myself I wouldn't. But around the same time, my body just expected something, like a habit I hadn't meant to form. It was cloudier that night. The stars were patchy, coming and going behind thin gray streaks. I sat on the steps again, hugging a mug I didn't really want, scanning the sky without focusing too hard. I didn't see the same star. At least, I don't think I did. What I did notice was how quiet it felt, not silent, just muted. The crickets had stopped, which happens sometimes, but even the distant road noise felt dampened, like someone had closed a door somewhere far away. Then one of the stars near the center of my view dimmed, not disappeared, just dulled like a light behind fog. I leaned forward, squinting. It shifted sideways. This one moved faster. Not dramatically, but enough that I couldn't pretend it was my eyes. It slid, paused, then slid again, always smooth, always controlled. No blinking, no trail. I felt that same pressure in my chest, like when an elevator stops too abruptly. I pulled my phone up again, hands clumsy, and as soon as the screen lit my face, the star stopped moving. It just stayed there. I lowered the phone slowly, watching the sky over the top edge. The star held still for a few seconds, then faded back into the background exactly like the night before. I didn't stay outside after that. I went straight to bed, locked the door again, and lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over, every time I thought I had it pinned down. Some natural explanation, some trick of light, it slipped away. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Not every night. Not at the same spot in the sky. Always subtle. Always brief. A star that drifted when it shouldn't. A point of light that thinned and vanished without actually going anywhere. Once I was with someone else. My neighbor Mark was over, helping me move a broken shelf out to the curb. We finished up and stood there talking, both of us looking up without really meaning to. I saw at first a star just above the power lines, steady and bright. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you see that one?" Mark followed my gaze. "Yeah." The star slid, just a little. "Is it moving?" I asked. He frowned. "I don't think so." It moved again, a clean sideways shift, unmistakable. "There," I said. "That?" Mark squinted. "I don't see." The star dimmed and blended into the sky mid-sentence. Mark looked at me. "See what?" I didn't answer right away. I was still staring at the empty space, my heart pounding so hard it felt loud. "Never mind," I said finally. "Probably nothing." He shrugged and went back inside. I stayed out a bit longer, staring at a sky that suddenly felt like it was paying attention to me. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I closed the curtains earlier. I kept lights on. I tried not to look up when I walked to my car. It sounds ridiculous, but there was something about those movements that felt intentional. Not directed at me exactly. More like reactive, like when you notice someone across a room notice you back. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. My nerves settled. I started sleeping better. The explanations I'd rehearsed hardened into something I could almost believe. Then one night, lying in bed, I noticed the light in the room shift. Not brighter, not darker, just thinner. Like the air itself had changed density. I sat up, heart racing, and the feeling vanished instantly. Everything went back to normal. The house creaked. The heater kicked on. I didn't look out the window. I don't know what those stars were. I don't know if they were stars at all, or something passing in front of them, or something using them as cover. I don't know why they moved the way they did, or why they seemed to stop when I tried to capture them. All I know is that sometimes when I catch myself staring at the sky for too long, I feel that same quiet pressure in my chest, and I force myself to look away before anything has the chance to move again. The glow showed up while I was standing barefoot on the back deck trying to wake myself up before work. It was still cold out, that gray hour before dawn when everything feels paused. I was drinking bad coffee from a chipped mug and staring out over the field behind my house, mostly zoning out. The horizon lit up like the sun was about to come up 10 minutes early. It wasn't bright orange like a normal sunrise. It was pale, almost white, like someone had turned on a huge light behind the tree line. The whole bottom edge of the sky just glowed, flat and even, no rays, no color. I remember thinking, that's weird. And then it started moving. The light didn't spread. It pulled upward, smooth, slow, like a curtain being lifted straight up into the sky. As it rose, the horizon went dark again underneath it, exactly the way it had been before. Within maybe 3 seconds, the glow was gone completely, and the sky was back to its normal early morning darkness. No sound, no flash, just gone. I stood there with my coffee cooling in my hand, waiting for something else to happen. Birds didn't start chirping, the wind didn't change. It was like nothing had happened at all. I checked the time on my phone, 5:12 a.m., exactly when I expected. No missed alarms, no weird notifications. I even opened the weather app like that would explain anything. Clear skies, sunrise at 5:41. I told myself it was probably some kind of distant lightning. Heat lightning, maybe. Even though there were no clouds anywhere. Even though it didn't flicker or spread or do anything lightning usually does. I went inside, got dressed, and tried not to think about it. On the drive to work, I kept glancing east whenever the road opened up. Everything looked normal. Pink clouds started showing up around the right time. The sun came up when it was supposed to. By the time I parked, I'd almost convinced myself I imagined the whole thing. That night, I mentioned it to my neighbor Chris when we were both out taking the trash down. I asked him if he'd been up early. He shook his head. Nah. Why? Did you see anything weird in the sky this morning? He laughed a little. Like what? Aliens? I shrugged and dropped it. I didn't want to sound nuts. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm again. Same feeling, like my body had already decided it was time. I checked the clock, 5:08. I didn't even bother with coffee. I just went straight out to the deck. The sky was dark, normal. I waited. At 5:12, the horizon lit up again. Same pale glow, same flat, even line stretching farther than I could see. My chest tightened and I realized I'd been hoping it wouldn't happen again. The light pulled upward, smooth and steady, exactly like before. I counted under my breath. 1, 2, 3. Gone. I whispered okay to nobody. This time something felt off afterward. The air felt thinner. That's the only word that fits, like the sky was higher than it should be. The stars looked sharper, too bright for that time of morning. I had this strange urge to look straight up instead of toward the horizon, and when I did, I felt dizzy, like standing too close to the edge of something tall. I went inside and locked the door without thinking. At work, I couldn't focus. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to find differences. There weren't any. Same timing, same movement, same silence. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound outside my bedroom window woke me up. Wind in the trees, a car on the road. At some point, I woke up convinced someone was standing outside, watching the house. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. Nothing but darkness in the corner of my fence. The third morning, I didn't go outside. I watched from the kitchen window instead, lights off, standing back so I wouldn't reflect in the glass. My phone was in my hand, camera open, even though I knew it wouldn't capture anything useful. 5:12. The glow appeared, just as strong through the trees. It climbed upward and vanished. But this time, I noticed something new. As the light pulled up, the shadows in my kitchen shifted. Not like the sun rising, sideways. The dark line under the cabinets slid a few inches along the wall, then snapped back the instant the glow disappeared. I dropped my phone. It hit the floor face down, and I didn't pick it up for a full minute. I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick and spent the morning sitting on the couch, curtains closed, TV on low volume. Around noon, I realized my ears were ringing, a dull pressure like I'd been on a plane that just landed. By late afternoon, I felt ridiculous, tired, embarrassed, even though no one else knew what was happening. I told myself I was stressed, sleep deprived. My brain was filling in gaps. That night, I forced myself to bed early. I put my phone on the nightstand, face down, and turned off the lamp. I woke up at 5:11 without an alarm. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. The house was completely quiet. No fridge hum, no distant traffic. Even the usual low electrical buzz was gone. At 5:12, the room brightened. Not a lot, just enough that I could see the edges of the ceiling more clearly through my eyelids. The light wasn't coming through the window. It felt like it was above the house, pressing down. Then it pulled away. The light faded upward, exactly like the horizon glow, and the room went dark again. A second later, sound rushed back in all at once. The fridge clicked on, a car passed outside, and my ears rang sharply. I sat up so fast my neck hurt. My phone screen was on. The camera app was open, pointed straight up. I hadn't touched it. The most recent photo was time-stamped 5:12 a.m. It showed my ceiling washed in a faint, pale glow that wasn't there anymore. I didn't stay in the house that morning. I threw on clothes, grabbed my keys, and drove until the sky was fully light. The sunrise that day was normal, completely ordinary. It's been weeks now. The glow hasn't come back. I still wake up early, though. Still feel that pressure sometimes, like the air is about to change. I don't stand outside before dawn anymore. But every so often, when I'm up too early and the sky is quiet, I get the sense that if I looked toward the horizon at just the wrong moment, I'd see it again, pulling upward, leaving everything else behind like nothing ever happened. The vibrations started while I was lying on my couch, half watching a cooking show and scrolling through my phone. At first, I thought it was the building. I lived in a small second-floor apartment above a dry cleaner, and sometimes the machines downstairs made the walls hum. It wasn't loud, though. I didn't really hear it so much as feel it, like a low buzz pressing gently into my chest and shoulders. I shifted on the couch, thinking maybe my phone was vibrating under me. It wasn't. It was in my hand, screen dark. The TV audio kept playing, but it sounded thin, like the bass had dropped out. I turned the volume up a notch, then back down. The vibration stayed the same. I sat up. The feeling got stronger. It was steady, not pulsing. A flat, even pressure. The kind you feel standing near a transformer or a big generator, except there was nothing like that anywhere near my place. I held my breath and focused. No rattling dishes, no shaking lights, just that low, heavy presence in the room, like the air itself was vibrating. I checked the time. 9:17 p.m. Outside, the street was quiet, a couple parked cars, the glow from the street lamp across the road, nothing unusual. I stood up, and the vibration followed me. That's when I realized it wasn't coming from the building. It wasn't coming from any direction I could point to. It felt like it was everywhere at once. I walked into the kitchen. Same thing. Bathroom. Same thing. Bedroom. Same thing. It didn't get louder or quieter. It didn't change at all, no matter where I went. It just sat there, pressing gently but insistently into my body. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't know what I'd even say. Hey, does the air feel weird to you? Didn't seem like a great opener. I went back to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch. My chest felt tight, not painful, just compressed. My breathing felt shallow even though I wasn't panicking yet. I looked at the window again. That's when I noticed the streetlight wasn't flickering, but it wasn't steady either. The light looked slightly blurred, like I was seeing it through water. The edges of the parked cars underneath it seemed soft, less defined. I rubbed my eyes hard and looked again. Same thing. The vibration deepened. Still not louder, just fuller. Like more of me was inside it. My ears popped suddenly, the way they do in an airplane, except sharper. A split second later, the vibration stopped. The silence afterward was overwhelming. It wasn't just quiet. It felt like sound had been turned off and then slowly turned back on again. My ears rang hard, a high-pitched tone that made me wince and clap my hands over them. I waited for the hum to come back. It didn't. I stayed there, frozen, listening to the ringing fade. The normal sounds of my apartment returned in layers. The fridge kicking on, the TV murmuring, a car passing outside. Everything looked normal again. I checked the time, 9:17 p.m. The exact same minute, that's when my stomach dropped. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through my messages. There was a text from my neighbor, Jess, sent at 9:24. Hey, did you just feel that? Thought there was an earthquake or something. I stared at the timestamp. 9:24, I typed back, feel what? She didn't respond. I stood up and went to the window again. The street looked normal, but something about it felt wrong now. Too still, like a set waiting for actors. I noticed that the porch light across the street was on. It usually wasn't. I leaned closer to the glass. The light flicked off, not gradually, just off. Then the one next to it went off. Then another, moving down the block in a straight line, one by one. I felt that pressure in my chest again, faint but growing. Before I could step back, every light on the street went dark at once. Street lights, porch lights, everything. The ringing in my ears came back, quieter than before, but sharper, like feedback. I backed away from the window. The vibration didn't return, but I could feel something else now. A sense of weight above me, like the ceiling had dropped a few inches closer to my head. I don't know why I looked up. There was nothing there but drywall and a faint water stain. Then the lights came back on. All at once, no flicker. The pressure vanished. I stood there shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I checked my phone again, 9:26. This time it changed when I blinked. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time the building creaked, I sat up, waiting for the hum to come back. It didn't. The next morning, Jess knocked on my door. She looked tired, pale. You hear anything weird last night? She asked. I told her about the vibration, the lights, the ringing. She frowned. I was lying in bed when it happened, thought a truck was idling outside or something. Then my ears popped, and it was gone. I asked her what time. She said, around 9:15, maybe a little after. Later that day, I checked the breaker panel. Everything was fine. I called the power company. They had no record of an outage. I even went downstairs and asked the owner of the dry cleaner if they'd been running new equipment. He looked confused and said they closed at 6. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small things. My ears would ring randomly, always at night. Sometimes I'd feel that same chest pressure for a few seconds, then nothing. Once, while lying on the couch again, I felt the vibrations start, but it faded before it fully formed, like it changed its mind. I started checking the time obsessively when it happened. It never lined up the same way twice. One night, I woke up just after midnight with my heart racing and that familiar pressure in my chest. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, afraid to move. The vibration didn't come. Instead, my ears popped again, gently this time. The room felt larger afterward, like the walls had shifted outward slightly. In the morning, I found my phone on the kitchen counter. I don't remember leaving it there. The activity log showed steps recorded between 12:03 and 12:11 a.m. I live alone. I still sit on that couch most nights. I still watch TV and scroll my phone. Sometimes when everything gets very quiet and my chest feels tight for no clear reason, I hold my breath and wait. So far, whatever it was hasn't fully come back. But every now and then, right before the ringing starts, I get the sense that the air around me is listening. I was sitting on the back steps with a mug of coffee, watching the horizon because I couldn't sleep. It was too early for sunrise, still an hour at least, but the sky had that faint pre-dawn gray that makes everything look unfinished. The air was cold enough that my breath showed, and the yard smelled like wet dirt and old leaves. That was when the horizon started to glow. At first I thought my eyes were just adjusting, or that maybe the sun was coming up earlier than I realized. The glow wasn't orange or pink like a normal sunrise. It was pale, almost white, spread thin and even, like someone had turned on a dim light behind the hills. It sat low just above the tree line, and it was steady. No flicker, no color. I checked my phone, 4:47 a.m. I stared at the glow and waited for it to change, to warm up or climb higher. It didn't. It just sat there, flat and calm, bright enough that the silhouettes of the trees sharpened against it. The birds didn't react. No early chirping, no sudden movement. Everything stayed quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the world was holding still. Then the glow moved. It didn't spread or brighten. It lifted, slowly, smoothly, like a curtain being pulled upward. The light peeled away from the horizon and rose into the sky, keeping the same shape, the same brightness, just climbing straight up. The land beneath it dropped back into darkness as it passed, the hills and trees fading into shadow again. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. My coffee spilled down the steps, steam rising from the splash, and I didn't even look at it. The glow kept rising. It didn't cast light on the clouds because there were no clouds. It didn't reflect off anything. It was just there, hovering now, no longer connected to the horizon at all. And then it was gone. Not fading, not dimming, just gone, like someone had switched it off. The sky snapped back to its normal pre-dawn darkness, stars visible again where the glow had been. I stood there with my hands clenched at my sides, waiting for something else to happen. A sound, a feeling, anything. Nothing did. The cold felt sharper after that, like I'd just stepped outside from a warm room, even though I'd been out there the whole time. The quiet felt heavier. I realized my ears were ringing slightly, not the way they do after a sudden change in pressure. I checked my phone again, 4:49 a.m., 2 minutes had passed. It felt longer. I stayed outside until the actual sunrise, which came when it was supposed to. Slow and orange and familiar. By then, my coffee was cold and my hands were numb. I kept replaying the way the light had lifted, straight up, clean and controlled. Later that morning, I mentioned it to my neighbor Ron when he walked his dog past my fence. He squinted at the sky like he might still see something there and said maybe it was a weird reflection from the highway, even though the highway was miles away and below the hills. That night, I sat outside again. I told myself I was just enjoying the quiet. The truth was I was waiting. Nothing happened the first night, or the second. I started to feel stupid, like I'd overreacted to something explainable and rare. Light does weird things sometimes. The atmosphere bends it. The brain fills in gaps. On the fourth morning, I woke up before my alarm, heart already beating fast, like my body knew something was coming. I pulled on a jacket and went outside. The horizon was dark. The stars were sharp and steady. I waited, staring so hard my eyes watered. At 4:46 a.m., the glow appeared again. Same place, same color, same soft, even brightness. It outlined the trees exactly the same way, like it was following a template. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The glow lifted. As it rose, I noticed something I hadn't the first time. The stars behind it weren't disappearing the way they would behind a cloud or fog. They were still there, just slightly distorted, like I was looking at them through thick glass. When the glow detached from the horizon completely, my chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around it. I had the sudden, strong feeling of being observed. Not watched in a creepy way, more like noticed, the way you notice an insect on a window before deciding whether it matters. The glow reached a point directly above the hills and stopped. For maybe 2 seconds, it just hung there. Then it vanished again, leaving the sky unchanged, untouched. I didn't stay outside for sunrise that time. I went inside and locked the door, even though I hadn't felt afraid in any normal sense. More unsettled than scared, like something had broken a rule I didn't know existed. I started writing down the times, always between 4:46 and 4:48, never on the exact same minute, but close. I checked weather reports. No clouds, no storms, no temperature inversions, nothing unusual. On the sixth morning, I drove out toward the hills after it happened, pulling over on a dirt road where I'd have a clear view. The ground was still dark, frost crunching under my boots. I stared at the spot where the glow had been. Nothing lingered, no warmth, no smell. No sign at all. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the sky lighten naturally, feeling foolish and exposed. That night, I dreamed of standing in the yard again, only the glow didn't lift. It stretched instead, thinning until it was a long, narrow strip of light that cut straight up into the sky, disappearing beyond where I could see. I woke up with my heart racing and the sensation that the room was too small. The glow didn't come back after that week. I still wake up early sometimes, especially when I can't sleep. I sit on the steps and watch the horizon, half hoping, half dreading that pale light will return. It hasn't. But every once in a while, when the sky is perfectly clear and the air is cold and still, I get the sense that dawn is about to break too early again. And for a second, before anything actually happens, the darkness feels thinner, like it's waiting to be pulled away. I was lying on a lawn chair in my backyard watching the clouds drift by. It was late afternoon, that slow part of the day when the sun isn't harsh anymore, but it's not evening yet. The air was warm and still, no breeze. I'd gotten home early from work because the shop closed unexpectedly, some issue with the internet, I think, and I didn't feel like going back inside. So I dragged the old chair out onto the grass, cracked open a soda, and just stared up. I'd grown up doing that, watching clouds slide past, trying to see shapes. It was one of the few things that still shut my brain off. At first, everything looked normal. Thin white clouds stretched across the sky, moving slowly from west to east. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. I remember thinking it might rain later because the sky had that hazy look to it, like the blue was washed out. I checked my phone at some point, 4:38 p.m. No notifications, no missed calls, nothing urgent. I set the phone on my chest and kept watching. That's when I noticed one of the clouds wasn't moving. It took a while to register because everything else was. Your brain expects consistency, I guess. But after maybe a minute of watching, I realized the cloud directly above me hadn't shifted at all. The others were slowly sliding past it, thinning and stretching as they went, but this one patch stayed locked in place. It wasn't shaped like a normal cloud either. It was rounder, softer around the edges, almost like a smudge someone had rubbed into the sky. I sat up slightly, squinting. I told myself it was probably higher up than the others, or lower, some optical thing. I'd read enough random science articles to know clouds could do weird stuff depending on altitude. Still, it bothered me. I watched it for another minute, then another. It didn't move. I got out of the chair and stood up, craning my neck back. The sun was off to the side, not in my eyes. I had a clear view. The clouds stayed perfectly still. I looked around, half expecting to see something on the ground that lined up with it. A radio tower, maybe, or a plane leaving a contrail that made it look anchored. There was nothing. Just my yard, the fence, my neighbor's shed, and the tree line beyond. When I looked back up, the cloud was still there. That was when the light appeared. At first, it was so faint I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A subtle brightening, right in the center of the cloud, like someone had turned up a dimmer switch just a notch. I held my breath without realizing it. The glow didn't spread outward. It stayed contained, a soft, milky brightness that didn't cast rays or shine through the edges. The cloud didn't thin or change shape. It just held the light. I waited for thunder, for a flash, for anything that would make it make sense. Nothing happened. The glow slowly intensified, not bright, but noticeable enough that I was certain I wasn't imagining it anymore. The surrounding sky didn't change. No reflections, no flicker, just that one cloud, glowing quietly from within. I felt this weird pressure in my ears, like when you're in an elevator that's moving too fast. Not painful, just uncomfortable enough to notice. I checked the time again, 4:41 p.m. Only 3 minutes had passed, but it felt longer. I thought about calling someone. My sister, maybe, or my neighbor across the fence, Carl, but I couldn't bring myself to look away, even for a second. I had this strong, irrational feeling that if I did, it would stop, like it was contingent on being watched. The glow peaked and held for a moment, then it began to fade. Not suddenly, slowly, like a candle being lowered into water. The brightness dimmed, receded inward, and vanished completely. The cloud returned to the same dull white it had been before. For a split second, nothing changed. Then the cloud started moving again. It slid eastward at the same speed as the others, blending back into the pattern like it had never stopped. The pressure in my ears disappeared. The sky looked normal. Too normal. I stood there, neck aching, heart thudding, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. A plane passed high overhead a minute later, leaving a faint contrail. I watched it carefully, almost suspiciously. It behaved exactly how it should. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. My soda had gone warm. I didn't finish it. That night, I told myself it was probably sunlight hitting ice crystals, or some rare atmospheric thing I didn't understand. There were explanations for everything, right? But over the next few days, small things started bothering me. My phone battery drained faster than usual, even when I wasn't using it. My dog, Milo, kept stopping in the yard and staring up at the same patch of sky, tail low, ears back. Once he growled softly, which he never did unless someone was at the fence. On the third night after it happened, I woke up around 3 a.m. for no reason. The house was quiet, but not in the normal way. The refrigerator wasn't running. The usual hum from the neighborhood was gone. I lay there, listening. There was no sound, but I felt that same subtle pressure in my ears, the same sense of stillness. I didn't get up. I didn't look out the window. The pressure faded after a while. I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, my alarm was going off. Nothing else happened after that. Not like the cloud anyway. But sometimes when I'm outside and the sky is calm, I catch myself scanning for patches that don't move, watching for that soft internal glow, and every now and then I get this feeling that whatever it was didn't just pass by, that it stopped, that it noticed. The power went out while I was rinsing a plate at the kitchen sink. Everything shut off at once. Lights, fridge, the low hum of the dishwasher I'd forgotten to start. The house dropped into that sudden hollow quiet that only happens when electricity cuts. Outside, the streetlights went dark too, one after another, like someone flipping switches down the block. I stood there with my hands still wet, listening. No thunder, no wind. The weather had been calm all evening, warm for early fall. I waited for the usual sounds to come back, a neighbor's generator, a car alarm, someone yelling, but nothing happened. I dried my hands on my shirt and walked to the front window. The neighborhood looked wrong without light. Houses blended into each other, dark shapes stacked along the street. The sky was clear, stars faint but visible. No moon. I could see all the way down the block, farther than usual, because there was nothing glowing to break it up. I figured it was just a grid issue. It happened once or twice a year. I stepped onto the porch to check if anyone else was outside. That's when the light appeared. It started at the far end of the street, low and narrow, like a flashlight beam stretched too thin. It slid slowly across the rooftops, not sweeping wide like someone scanning, but moving in a straight, deliberate line. The light itself was pale, almost colorless. Not white exactly, more like a washed-out gray. It didn't flicker. It didn't illuminate anything the way light normally does. Roof shingles didn't brighten. Windows didn't reflect it. The light just existed on top of things, like a projection that forgot how shadows worked. I froze halfway down the porch steps. The beam moved house to house, passing over chimneys, antenna, tree branches. When it crossed leaves, they didn't glow or cast shadows. They just stayed dark, like the light wasn't really touching them. I remember thinking, very calmly, that this wasn't a spotlight. Helicopters used spotlights sometimes, especially near the highway a few miles east, but those were loud and harsh and bright enough to hurt your eyes. This thing made no sound at all. No rotors, no engine, no wind. The beam reached the house across the street and slid over the roofline. I waited for it to reach me. It didn't. It stopped short, hovering just before my side of the street. hung there for a second, perfectly still. I could see the edges of it more clearly then, soft, slightly uneven, like fog being held in shape. My chest tightened. I became very aware of how exposed I was standing there, barefoot on my porch, the rest of the neighborhood dark and silent. Then the beam moved again. It lifted slightly and drifted sideways, cutting across the backyards behind the houses instead of the street. It passed over fences and sheds, moving at the same slow pace, like it was following something invisible. I turned my head to track it and noticed something else that made my stomach drop. No one else was reacting. No doors opening. No voices. No phones lighting up. It was like the entire neighborhood was empty, except for me. The light continued its path, reaching the tree line behind the houses. As it crossed the taller trees, I expected it to scatter or break up. It didn't. It stayed intact, gliding over the canopy, still not casting shadows, still silent. I stepped off the porch without realizing it, standing on the sidewalk. That was when the sound disappeared. I hadn't noticed it until it was gone, but the usual night noises, insects, distant traffic, the faint hiss of wind, all cut out at once. The silence felt thick, like pressure in my ears. The beam paused again, just above the trees. I felt an urge to wave, to shout, to do something that would prove I was real and awake. I didn't. I stood there with my hands curled into fists, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The beam slid upward and thinned, fading as it rose until it was gone entirely. The moment it vanished, sound rushed back. Crickets started up all at once, loud and uneven. Somewhere a dog barked. I heard a car engine turn over a few streets away. I realized I was breathing fast and forced myself to slow down. I went back inside and locked the door, even though I knew that was pointless. I stood in the dark living room, listening, half expecting the light to reappear through the windows. It didn't. About 10 minutes later, the power came back on. Lights flicked on throughout the house. The fridge hummed. The street lights outside glowed to life like nothing had happened. I stood there until my eyes adjusted, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of darkness and nerves. The next morning, I walked down the block and asked my neighbor Tom if he'd noticed the outage. He said, yeah. His power went out for a bit. Asked if mine was back on too. I asked if he'd been outside. He said no. He'd been watching TV when it shut off and just waited it out. I asked if he'd seen anything strange. Lights. Movement. Anything. He shook his head and laughed. Said I watched too much late-night stuff. Over the next few days, I paid attention to small things. How the shadows fell in my yard. How quiet it got at night. I checked the news, neighborhood forums, utility reports. The outage was logged as temporary fault. No details. I didn't mention the beam to anyone else. A week later, I was out back taking the trash to the alley just after sunset when I noticed the roof lines again. I stood there longer than I needed to, watching the dark settle. Nothing happened. But now, whenever the power flickers, even for a second, I feel that same pressure in my ears, and I always look at the rooftops first, waiting to see if the light comes back to finish whatever it was doing. The radio started doing it about 20 minutes into the drive, right after I left the last real town behind. I was heading west on Highway 50, late afternoon, the kind of road that stretches flat and empty for miles at a time. It was early October, dry and clear, the sun already dropping low enough to throw long shadows across the asphalt. I'd finished a job site inspection near Delta and was trying to get home before dark. I had the radio on low, half listening. Country station faded out, so I reached over and nudged the dial, just enough to catch something else. Instead of static, I heard a tone. Not loud, not sharp, just a soft, steady sound, like someone humming a single note through clenched teeth. It sat between two stations, perfectly centered, not warbling the way weak signals usually do. I frowned and twisted the dial a little more. The tone disappeared instantly. Twisted it back. The tone came back. I tried that a few times, slowing the car slightly without realizing it. Every time the needle hit that exact spot, the sound returned. No voices, no rhythm, just that single flat note. I told myself it was interference, electrical noise, maybe a tower bouncing something weird across the valley. Still, it made the hair on my arms lift. I left it there and kept driving. The road dipped and rose gently, cutting through scrub and low hills. No trees, just pale grass and rock. The sky was wide and empty, the sun turning orange at the edges. I glanced at the horizon out of habit, then back to the road. That's when I noticed the light. It sat just above the far hills, slightly left of where the sun had gone down. Small, dim, not blinking, not moving, too bright to be a star, too steady to be anything else I recognized. I checked my mirrors, thinking maybe it was a reflection or another car lining up behind me. Nothing. The tone from the radio felt louder now, even though I hadn't touched the volume. I drove on. The light stayed exactly where it was relative to the horizon. As the road curved slightly, it didn't shift the way a distant tower or vehicle should have. It just hung there, like it was painted onto the sky. I swallowed and reached for the radio again, turning the dial a hair. The tone cut out. I turned it back. The tone returned immediately. I didn't like that connection forming in my head, so I turned the radio off completely. The cabin went quiet except for the hum of the tires and the faint rattle of something loose in the trunk. The light was still there. I told myself it was a planet. Venus, maybe. Something like that, except it was too low and the color was wrong. It wasn't warm. It looked white, almost pale blue. As I crested a shallow rise, the light dipped slightly, like it was sinking. My stomach tightened. I eased off the gas. The car slowed, engine pitch dropping. The light continued its slow descent, perfectly smooth, like it was following the curve of the earth. I turned the radio back on without thinking. Static. Then the tone snapped back into place. Same pitch, same volume. I felt it then, a faint pressure behind my eyes, like the beginning of a headache. My ears felt full, the way they do when you're driving up a mountain too fast. The light continued to sink. I pulled onto the shoulder. The gravel crunched loudly under the tires, startling me. Dust puffed up and settled. I put the car in park and leaned forward over the steering wheel, staring through the windshield. The light was closer to the horizon now, maybe a finger width above it. The tone from the radio didn't change, but it felt closer somehow, like it wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. I checked them anyway, pressing my hand against the dash. The vibration I felt there didn't match the sound exactly. I looked at my phone, no signal, as expected. The time reads 6:42 p.m. I don't know why I did it, but I turned the radio off again. The silence felt wrong, too deep, like the world had taken a step back. The light kept sinking. A strange thought crossed my mind then, clear and uninvited. When it goes below the horizon, something will change. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew it felt true. The pressure in my head increased. Not painful, but distracting. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. The light touched the horizon. For a second, nothing happened. Then it slipped below the line of hills. The instant it disappeared, the radio clicked softly, even though it was off. Just a tiny mechanical sound, like a switch resetting. The pressure vanished. The air felt normal again. I took a deep breath that turned into a shaky laugh before I could stop it. My shoulders relaxed and I leaned back in the seat, suddenly aware of how tense I'd been. I started the car and pulled back onto the road, eager to put distance between myself and that stretch of highway. 10 minutes later, the radio came back on by itself. I jumped, swerving slightly before correcting. My heart hammered as I glanced at the dash. The volume was low, no tone, just static. I turned it off again, harder this time, like I could punish it into behaving. The rest of the drive passed without incident. Dusk deepened into early night. The road stayed empty. When I finally hit the outskirts of my town, I felt ridiculous for how shaken I was. At home, I didn't mention it to my wife. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound stupid. I ate dinner, watched TV, went to bed. That night, I dreamed of driving the same road, except the horizon never came closer, no matter how long I drove. The light hung there, fixed, and the tone filled the car until it felt like it was vibrating my bones. I woke up before dawn, heart racing, ears ringing faintly. The next week, I took the same route again. I told myself I was being practical. It was the fastest way to get to the site. Still, my hands tightened on the steering wheel as I passed the spot where I'd pulled over before. The radio stayed normal. The sky was clear, no light. I relaxed, slowly. About 30 miles later, just as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the radio picked up the tone again. Soft, steady. I didn't touch the dial this time. I looked ahead. Far in the distance, just above the hills, the light was back. I didn't stop the car. I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes on the road and drove straight toward it, jaw clenched, pulse thudding in my ears. The light didn't sink this time. It stayed level, hovering just above the horizon, matching my speed perfectly. No matter how fast or slow I went, it held its position. The tone grew stronger, not louder, exactly. Fuller. Like it was filling the space inside the car. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down. No notification. Just the screen lighting up, then going dark again. The pressure returned, heavier than before. My vision felt slightly off, like depth didn't work the way it should. Then, without warning, the light dropped. Straight down. It vanished below the horizon in less than a second. The tone cut off mid-note. The radio went dead. Not static. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered once, then stabilized. I blinked hard, breathing fast, knuckles white on the wheel. The road ahead looked normal, but something felt off. The distance between mile markers seemed wrong, like I was covering ground too quickly. When I finally reached the turnoff to the site, my watch said I was 8 minutes ahead of schedule. I don't take that route anymore. Every once in a while, when I'm driving at sunset and the radio drifts between stations, I hear the edge of that tone again. I turn it off immediately, eyes flicking to the horizon before I can stop myself. So far, the light hasn't come back. I'm not sure what I'll do if it does. The lights outside the bus windows stretched all at once, like someone had dragged a finger across wet paint. It only lasted a second, maybe less, just long enough for me to register that something was wrong. Then everything snapped back into focus. The bus was still moving. The hum of the engine, the soft rattle of the windows, the tired sway as it rolled over uneven pavement, all normal. But the street we were on wasn't. I knew the route too well to miss it. We were 3 stops farther along than we should have been. I sat up straighter in my seat and looked around, half expecting someone else to be reacting. Nobody was. A woman across the aisle was staring at her phone. A guy near the back had his head against the window, asleep. The driver's posture hadn't changed at all. I checked my watch. It was 11:42 p.m. That didn't make sense. We'd left downtown at 11:31. Even with light traffic, it should have been at least another 10 minutes before we reached this part of the route. I pulled my phone out and unlocked it. Same time. No missed notifications, no dropped signal. Everything looked normal, which somehow made it worse. I glanced back out the window. The city looked flatter. That's the only word I can think of. The lights were there. Storefronts, street lamps, apartment windows, but they didn't have depth. No glow bleeding into the dark, no soft edges, just clean points of light against a black background. The bus rolled through an intersection without slowing. That caught my attention more than anything else. This was usually a long red light. One of those intersections everyone complains about. We didn't even tap the brakes, just straight through, smooth and steady. I leaned forward and looked toward the driver. His face was calm, too calm. Hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, no radio chatter, no music playing. The bus felt quieter than it should have. Not silent, just muted, like sound was being absorbed instead of bouncing around the cabin. I stood up. The moment my feet hit the aisle, the lights outside smeared again. This time I saw it more clearly. Every point of light stretched into a perfectly straight line, all of them parallel, all pointing backward, like we were moving impossibly fast, even though the bus didn't feel like it was accelerating. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the top of a seat to steady myself. The smearing stopped. We were suddenly approaching my stop. Not approaching, nearly past it. "Hey," I said, louder than I meant to. "This is my stop." The driver didn't react. I moved closer to the front. "Hey, you missed." The bus slowed smoothly and pulled over. The doors hissed open. I stepped off without waiting for him to respond. The moment my foot hit the sidewalk, the normal city sounds rushed back in. Distant traffic, a siren far away, wind between buildings. The world felt louder, deeper, more real. The bus pulled away immediately. I stood there for a few seconds, heart racing, watching its taillights disappear around a corner they shouldn't have reached that quickly. I walked the rest of the way home instead of waiting for another bus. Every step felt off, like the ground had a different texture than I remembered. The buildings looked familiar, but slightly misaligned, like a set built to resemble my neighborhood rather than the thing itself. When I got to my apartment, my hallway light flickered as I unlocked the door. Inside, everything was where I'd left it. Shoes by the door, dishes in the sink, my jacket on the chair. I checked my watch again. 11:42 p.m. It hadn't moved. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at it, trying to remember exactly when I'd last checked the time on the bus. My memory slid right over that moment, like there was nothing there to grab onto. I went to bed eventually, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd missed something important. Not in a vague, anxious way, in a specific, directional way. Like I'd been somewhere else and returned without noticing the trip back. At work, I mentioned the bus ride to my coworker Mark while we were waiting for the coffee machine. He frowned. What time was it? Late, I said, around 11:30. He hesitated. Which bus? I told him the route number. Mark stared into his coffee for a moment. That's weird. What? My sister drives that route sometimes. She mentioned something last week, said she lost time on a run. Dispatch thought she'd skipped a break, but she swore she hadn't. That stuck with me. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention on my commute. Nothing happened. Everything felt normal. I started to relax, to convince myself it had been exhaustion or a momentary lapse in awareness. Then it happened again. Same bus, same time of night. This time I stayed seated when the lights smeared. I didn't stand. I didn't move. I just watched. The effect lasted longer, maybe 2 seconds. Long enough for me to notice that the reflections in the window lagged slightly behind the bus's motion, like the glass was struggling to keep up with reality. When the clarity returned, we were even farther along than before. Someone near the front laughed softly, like they'd just finished a pleasant dream. I looked at him. He blinked a few times, then frowned, confused, like he didn't know why he'd laughed. I checked my watch. 5 minutes gone. I got off at the next stop, even though it wasn't mine. I walked the long way home, avoiding main roads, trying to shake the feeling that something was following just behind me, keeping pace without being seen. A week later, I stopped taking that bus. A month after that, I ran into Mark again in the break room. He looked tired. "Remember what you said about the bus?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "My sister quit," he said. "She said there were gaps she couldn't explain. Routes finishing too early, too late. Cameras showing the bus in places it couldn't have reached yet." What did dispatch say? They said the footage was corrupted. That night, I dreamed of straight lines of light stretching backward forever, all perfectly aligned, like the city had been reduced to vectors and motion. When I woke up, my phone was on the floor across the room. I didn't remember knocking it off the nightstand. Sometimes when I'm out late and see a bus approaching, I watch the lights reflected in its windows. If they look even slightly too straight, too clean, I let it pass. I don't know where that bus goes during those missing minutes, but I'm pretty sure it's still following the route, just not one that shows up on any map. I was halfway through a loop trail near Estes Park when I saw it, the one that cuts behind the ridge and gives you those panoramic views of the valley. I'd started later than I should have. Work ran long, and I didn't want to skip the hike completely. So, by the time I was heading back, dusk had already settled in. The temperature dropped fast the way it does at elevation, and everything had that bluish tint you get right before full dark. The trail was empty. It was a Wednesday, early spring, and most people didn't bother with that path unless it was full daylight. I'd only seen one other hiker on the way up, a guy named Mason who I'd talked to briefly while tightening my pack straps. He'd said something about making it to the overlook before sundown. I'd nodded and kept going. We parted ways at a fork, and I hadn't seen him again. By the time I reached the narrow section between two rocky outcrops, the sun was gone behind the mountains. The sky above the peaks was still glowing faintly, but the forest around me had gone dark. I turned on my headlamp, even though I didn't really need it yet. Something about the quiet felt heavier than usual. I had stopped at the overlook to drink some water and adjust my knee sleeve, and that's when I noticed the bright point of light. At first, I thought it was a star. It was the right color, white with just a hint of bluish halo, and the sky was turning dark enough for the first stars to appear. But this one was too low, too bright. It was hovering in the gap between two distant peaks, sitting where no star could be. I stared at it for a good 10 seconds without moving. It didn't flicker, It didn't waver with the wind. It just stayed exactly where it was, like someone had pinned it to the sky. I blinked hard, trying to adjust my eyes. When I looked again, the light had moved. Not much, maybe a couple degrees to the right, but the motion was so smooth it made my stomach dip. It didn't arc like a plane or dip like a drone. It drifted sideways in this unnervingly perfect glide, like it didn't care about momentum or gravity or anything else that normally affects something moving through the air. I lowered my water bottle slowly. The light drifted farther, still horizontal, still steady. I tracked it across the gap between the peaks. After about 5 seconds, it slowed, stopped, hovered again. I reached up to adjust my headlamp, even though it wasn't in my eyes, because something in me wanted to do anything other than keep watching that light directly. When I glanced back, it was still there, except the halo around it had dimmed, just slightly, like it was running low on energy. It pulsed once, softly, like a dying ember giving one last glow. Then it faded. Not instantly, not like a switch being flipped. It dimmed slowly, shrinking in brightness until it was nothing more than a faint dot, then nothing at all. I waited for a plane to follow it, or a satellite, or anything that could have explained what I'd just seen. But the gap between the peaks stayed empty. I checked my phone for the time, 7:49 p.m., then I noticed the signal icon, no bars. Normally I got decent reception up there, at least one bar. I held the phone up higher. Still nothing. The air had gone strangely quiet too. No wind, no rustling, not even birds calling from the trees. Just stillness. I put my phone away and started back on the trail, trying to convince myself I'd seen something explainable. Maybe a drone from a research group. Maybe some distant reflection, but neither explanation sat right. About 10 minutes into the hike back, I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. I spun around, heart lurching. My headlamp beam cut across the narrow path. Nothing. Nobody. The footsteps continued, a soft crunching on gravel, but they weren't behind me anymore. They were off to the right, in the brush. I held my breath, listening. Crunch, pause, crunch. Slow, deliberate. It didn't sound like an animal. Animals move with more inconsistency, more noise. These steps had a rhythm to them, like someone trying not to be heard. Mason? I called out. Silence. I waited another few seconds before moving again. The steps didn't follow, but they didn't fade either. I heard one last soft crunch, like whoever, or whatever, was out there had stopped walking and was just standing. Watching, maybe. I picked up my pace. The forest seemed darker than before. My headlamp beam felt too narrow, like I kept missing something just outside its reach. I fought the urge to keep looking over my shoulder. Around the next bend, I noticed something strange. The air felt warmer. It made no sense. The temperature had been dropping steadily since I'd started back. But this patch of trail, just 20 or 30 feet, felt like someone had turned on a space heater. Warm air against the side of my face, enough to make me stop walking. I held my hand out. The warmth was strongest on the right side of the trail. I turned my headlamp toward the trees. The light hit nothing unusual, just pines and underbrush. But the warmth pulsed once, faintly, like a breath. I staggered backward, heart hammering. The warm air receded instantly. The temperature dropped back to normal mountain cold. That was enough for me. I kept moving, practically speed walking down the switchbacks. Halfway down, my headlamp flickered. Just once, a quick sputter. Then it steadied. I slapped the side of it anyway. New batteries, so it shouldn't have failed. The sudden darkness of that flicker sent a jolt through me I couldn't shake. A few minutes later, the reception on my phone returned all at once. 3 bars. The normal background noises of the forest came back too. Quietly at first, like the woods were warming up again. A distant owl call, wind brushing through leaves, life returning to the trail. By the time I reached the trailhead, I felt absurd for how fast my heart was beating. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and the overhead lamp buzzed normally. But before I got in, I couldn't help looking back up toward the peaks. Just for a second, I looked at the gap where the light had hovered. Nothing. No glow, no ember-like pulse. But something caught my eye far off to the right, another faint point of white. Not bright, not moving, just hanging there above a ridge I couldn't name. I blinked, and it vanished. I stood there another minute, staring, afraid it might come back, or afraid it wouldn't, I'm not sure which. Eventually, I got in the car and drove home. I kept checking the rearview mirror the whole way, half expecting to see a floating pinpoint drifting behind me with that impossible smoothness. But all I saw were the dark silhouettes of the mountains and the fading colors of dusk. Nothing more. I was night fishing on Lake Mendota, something I'd started doing after work when my schedule got weird and I couldn't sleep until late anyway. It was early June, warm but not sticky, with a thin layer of fog hovering over the water. Not enough to hide anything, just enough to make the horizon blur. The lake wasn't busy that night. One pontoon way out near Governor's Island, a kayak closer to shore, and me sitting on the old wooden dock behind the park. It was about 11:40 p.m. I remember that because I kept checking the time, debating whether I should pack it up soon before the humidity really kicked in. My lantern was dimmed low to avoid spooking fish, and the only sounds were gentle water laps and the occasional plunk of a carp somewhere in the dark. I was retying a knot when I noticed the light. A thin, perfectly straight line of white sliding across the lake's surface. At first I thought it was a reflection. Maybe headlights from the road behind me hitting the water through a gap in the trees. But cars had passed earlier, and their reflections had always been broken, jittery. Nothing like this. This light was clean, sharp. It moved in a slow, steady sweep, cutting right across the faint fog sitting on the water. I froze with the line in my hands. The beam was so thin it looked like someone had drawn on the lake with a white pencil. It stretched maybe 30 or 40 feet and moved as if coming from a high-angle spotlight. Except when I looked up, the sky was empty. No planes, no drones, just a dark, hazy expanse with scattered stars. I stood up. The line of light continued sliding, perfectly horizontal, as if scanning the water. When it reached a patch of reeds near the shore, it didn't bend or waver, just passed cleanly over them as the reeds weren't even there. My breath caught in my throat. There was no sound. Not from the water, not from the trees, even the insects had gone quiet. I slowly turned my head to look for any source, someone on the dock, someone on the far shore, a boat with a floodlight. Nothing. The pontoon I'd seen earlier was gone. The kayak had paddled off without me noticing. I was the only person left. The line of light stopped moving. It held still on the surface about 20 yards out. I could see the tiny ripples of the lake distorting it, but the line itself didn't break, which didn't make sense. Light doesn't stay that perfectly straight when water moves underneath it. I took one step closer to the edge of the dock. The light reacted. It shrank, like it contracted into itself, becoming shorter but brighter. Not by much, but enough that I felt it more than saw it. A sudden alertness, like someone focusing their attention. I stayed completely still. For several seconds, nothing moved. The lake felt held in place, like suspended. The fog drifted around everything except that line of light, like it avoided getting too close. Then the line expanded again, slowly, stretching back to its previous length, and it began sliding the other direction. Not fast, not jerky, just smooth, deliberate, like it was searching for something. I watched it move all the way to the far end of the dock, where it paused again. The water lapped softly against the wood, but even those sounds seemed muted. Then I noticed something else. My fishing line, which had been dangling motionless in the water, was vibrating gently. Not from fish, not from wind, just a steady tremor that traveled up the rod and into my hand, and into my hand. I reeled in quickly, not wanting anything touching the water near wherever that light was. The vibrating stopped once the line cleared the surface. But the moment I set the rod down, the light contracted again, brightening for a second time. It wasn't reacting to sound. It wasn't reacting to movement on the water. It was reacting to me. I backed up to the midpoint of the dock, heart pounding. The planks creaked under my weight, and the sound echoed strangely across the lake, like the fog muffled it unevenly. The light expanded once more, stretching wide, then faded slightly, not disappearing, but dimming to a barely visible outline. I held my breath. The light brightened again, sharper than before, and then, without warning, it vanished. 1 second it was there, sliding over the water, and the next the surface was completely dark, only the faint reflection of my lantern marking where the dock met the lake. The silence that followed felt wrong, heavy, expectant. I waited for the line to reappear. Nothing. I turned slowly, scanning the sky again. Still no planes, no distant spotlights, no search beams. just a still, clouded night that hadn't changed at all. I picked up my lantern and held it out toward the water, half expecting the light to reveal something just under the surface. The lake stared back, black and calm. That's when a small splash sounded off to my left. Not a natural one, not a fish. It was too clean, too centered, like an object had dropped into the water with intent. I swung the lantern toward the sound, lighting up only fog and ripples. Another splash came from behind me, then one from farther out. Not rapid, not chaotic, just sporadic drops, like pebbles falling from nowhere. I stood perfectly still, my fingers tightening around the lantern handle. The splashes continued for maybe 15 seconds, then stopped all at once, and then the entire forest seemed to inhale and go silent again. I packed up without bothering to coil my line properly. Every sound I made felt wrong, too loud, or too sharp, or out of place. Even the metal clasp on my tackle box clicked like it was being amplified. As I was about to step off the dock, I hesitated and looked back one more time. For a split second, less than a blink, I saw a faint line of light flicker across the water again. Not sweeping, not moving, just appearing like a ghost of the first one. Then it disappeared completely, leaving the lake as black as ink. I practically jogged back to my car, though it felt like the world was stuck a half second behind me. The fog thickened near the tree line, swallowing the shapes of the picnic tables and trash bins. When I reached the gravel lot, my headlights reflected off something on the water, a short, sharp gleam, before fading. I drove home with the radio off, checking the rearview mirror every few minutes, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to see anything through the fog. When I finally got home and stepped inside, the silence in my living room felt too similar to the silence at the lake, like it had followed me. The next morning, I went back to the dock out of stubbornness. The lake looked normal. Kids were fishing, boats were out, the fog was gone. There was nothing unusual on the water. No light, no splashes, no silence that felt like pressure. But once when the sun hit the surface just right, I thought I saw a thin white line gliding across the water toward the reeds. It vanished before I could be sure I hadn't imagined it. I was out behind my apartment complex when it happened, standing in the patchy grass by the dumpsters, trying to coax my neighbor's cat down from the fence. It was around 11, cool for early September, and the moon was bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. The cat, a skittish, orange thing named Murphy, had bolted from the stairwell when I opened the door and climbed the fence like he'd been training for it. His owner, Dave, was out of town for the week, and I'd promised to look after him. I had just gotten Murphy's attention. He was making that weird chirping noise cats do at bugs when the light changed. Not dimmed, not brightened, just changed, like someone had quietly adjusted the color temperature of the night without asking permission. I looked up at the moon. It was high and full, clean white against a clear sky, and then something slid across it. I didn't see where it started, only the moment it entered the frame of the moon's glow. A dark shape, drifting slowly, no sound, no fluttering, no change in outline. Too smooth to be a bird, too big, too steady. It crossed from right to left, blocking a perfect crescent of the moon for maybe 2 seconds. Then it slipped off the other side and vanished into the darkness. Murphy hissed. A low, tiny hiss, like he wasn't sure he wanted to commit to being upset. My first thought was, drone, but it hadn't moved like one. No blinking, no dipping or rising, no buzzing. It had been more like a shadow passing under a street lamp. Except the street lamp was the moon, and the shadow had been huge. I stared at the empty patch of sky for a few seconds. Nothing. The moon looked normal again. The air felt normal. The only sound was a car turning into the parking lot behind the building. Murphy jumped off the fence and bolted toward the stairs. I followed, not running, but walking faster than usual. Inside my apartment, I turned off the lights and went straight to the sliding balcony door. I pulled the blinds apart with 2 fingers and looked up at the moon again, expecting I don't know what. A second pass, maybe. Some lingering outline. But the sky was clear. I stood there for a while, watching. Nothing moved except a few bats near the trees by the creek. I told myself to let it go. It was late. Maybe my depth perception was off. Maybe it was just a goose flying higher than it looked. I made some tea, fed Murphy, opened my laptop, tried to distract myself. It didn't work. Around midnight, I went back outside. Not because I wanted to see something again, but because avoiding it felt worse. The air was colder than before. There was a breeze now carrying that damp, earthy smell from the creek. I walked out to the edge of the parking lot where the streetlights didn't reach. The moon was still bright, still high, no shadows in front of it. I stayed out there for a few minutes, breathing slowly, listening. A few cicadas, a car on the highway a mile away. Nothing strange. Then, just as I was about to go inside, the breeze stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The leaves on the trees froze mid-rustle. The air settled unnaturally fast into a kind of heavy stillness. I could hear my own breathing again. Something in the sky dimmed. Not the moon this time, but the stars to the left of it. 3 or 4 of them faded a little, then brightened again a second later, almost like something had passed in front of them and kept going. I didn't move. I didn't even think to. I just stared up, waiting for another sign of movement. Another shadow. Another dimming. Nothing. I went inside and locked the balcony door, which I never did. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I woke up, I checked the ceiling like I expected light patterns to be there. Nothing ever was, but the feeling stuck with me. The next night, I walked Murphy before bed. He liked the routine, and so did I, usually. It was windy this time, and the moon was half hidden by fast-moving clouds. I was trying to fix one of Murphy's jingly toys that had snagged on the leash when I felt something. Felt, not heard. The air pressure shifted again. Not enough to hurt, just enough to notice. Like the atmosphere briefly stretched or compressed. Murphy stopped walking. His head snapped upward. Every muscle in his little body went rigid. His tail puffed so fast it startled me. I followed his gaze. The clouds above us were sliding east, thick and layered. And between 2 of those layers, for a brief moment, something darker moved. Not the color of a cloud. Clouds have texture, edges, thickness. This thing was uniform, smooth. A flat shape gliding across. It wasn't lit. It wasn't reflecting anything. It was just dark. The same darkness I'd seen pass over the moon the night before, but this time it was above my building, close enough that I could judge its size. Bigger than I'd thought. Much bigger. It moved slower than the clouds, drifting on a different path, and then the clouds folded over it, and it was gone. The wind resumed instantly. Murphy bolted so hard I nearly dropped the leash. I rushed him inside. I didn't even take off my shoes. I sat on the floor of the living room with him hiding under the coffee table, staring at the sliding door like something was going to press its face, or whatever, against it. I checked the time, 12:41 a.m. I don't know why that number stuck with me, but it did. I went to the bedroom and opened the curtains. The sky looked normal again. The moon peeked through the clouds, no shadows, no shapes. I didn't sleep much. 2 nights later, I woke to a thump outside. Not loud, not metallic, more like someone had gently bumped the siding of the building. I checked the window again. Normal. But after I lay down, the room brightened faintly for half a second. A soft silver glow brushed across the wall, not from the moon, not from a passing car. This was angled wrong, too high, too soft. I sat up, heart hammering. Murphy leapt onto the bed, trembling. The glow faded instantly, gone as if it had never happened. I moved slowly to the window. The glass felt cold, colder than the room. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for 3 cars. The streetlights were steady. No strange reflections. The sky calm. The next morning, everything looked perfectly normal. I walked to the coffee shop down the block, trying to convince myself nothing had happened. Sunlight, traffic, people, all of it grounding and ordinary. I almost believed myself. But as I sat outside drinking my coffee, a plane crossed overhead. Small passenger jet heading toward the city. I followed it with my eyes. For half an instant, the plane disappeared behind nothing. Not a cloud, there were none. Not a glare spot, it wasn't bright enough. It just slipped behind a shape I couldn't see, a subtle distortion in the blue sky, something transparent but present. Then it came back into view. No one else reacted. I didn't say anything. Now, weeks later, the nights feel normal again. Murphy acts like himself. I haven't seen any shadows cross the moon or shapes slipping between clouds. But I do check. Every night, without meaning to, I step onto the balcony and look at the moon for a few seconds. I wait for something to drift across it, too silent, too smooth, too big. Nothing ever does. But sometimes, just before I turn away, the light around it shifts for a moment. Just a moment. Then it's gone. I noticed the lights starting to act strange halfway down Alder Street, right after I passed the little corner market that always smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. It was around 10:45 p.m. early fall, one of those nights where the air feels cool but not cold, and everything has that damp, quiet heaviness. I'd stayed late at my friend Matt's place helping him move furniture around his apartment, and I didn't feel like waiting 40 minutes for the bus, so I decided to walk the 20 minutes back to my place. Alder was usually well lit, old metal street lamps every 30 yards or so, buzzing faintly, the kind of orange glow that made everything look slightly washed out. That night, though, the far end of the block looked dimmer than usual. I thought maybe a bulb was out. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized it wasn't one bulb. It was all of them, going dark one by one. The lamp closest to me was on. The next one flickered, then went black. 2 seconds later, the next one flickered. Then, black. Like dominoes. I slowed down. There was no power outage. The houses on either side of the street still had porch lights on, TVs flickering behind curtains. Just the street lamps were shutting off, and they were doing it in a perfect sequence down the block. I stopped walking entirely when the fifth light blinked out. The darkness was creeping toward me like a curtain being pulled shut. I waited for the lamps behind me, the ones closer to the market, to go out too, but they stayed steady, buzzing normally. Only the ones ahead were failing. I told myself it was probably a wiring issue. Something underground. A breaker tripping. The stupid explanations your brain reaches for, even when they don't fit what you're seeing. The sixth lamp flickered hard enough that the bulb inside rattled, then died. There were two more between me and the big intersection at Cedar Avenue. I could still see some light from the intersection spill into the dark stretch, but it wasn't enough to make me feel better. I checked my phone out of habit. No bars, not unusual for that area, but it made me feel more alone than I should have. I debated turning around and going back to Matt's instead of continuing, but the idea of walking back past all the houses with dark front yards somehow felt worse. At least the intersection ahead had traffic lights and usually a few cars passing. The seventh lamp died. I took a slow step backward. My heel scraped the pavement louder than it should have. I kept staring into the dark ahead, expecting to see someone. Maybe a city worker in a bucket truck or kids messing with the breaker box. But there was nobody. Just the empty street. The eighth lamp, the one closest to me, flickered wildly, like the bulb was being shaken inside the casing, then blinked out. That left me standing right at the edge of a long, perfect stretch of darkness. The whole block ahead was black now. Not dim, black, like the light from the intersection couldn't penetrate it fully. My eyes should have adjusted, but they didn't. The dark felt thick. That's when I heard the faint shimmer. Shimmer isn't the right word, but I can't think of a better one. It wasn't a hum or a buzz or a whistle. It was like tiny pieces of glass brushing together, soft, high-pitched, almost delicate. And it came from above me. I tilted my head back slowly. There was nothing in the sky, no plane, no drone, no bird, just a faint blur passing across the stars as if someone dragged translucent cloth overhead. It didn't block the stars exactly. It warped them, bent them slightly, like heat haze at night, but colder somehow. The shimmer passed directly over me, and all 8 streetlights flickered back to life at the same moment. The sudden brightness made me flinch. The lamps buzzed harder than usual, like they were waking up from sleep. For a few seconds, the entire block looked too bright, as if the bulbs were running beyond their normal power. The shimmering sound faded as whatever that was moved farther down the road. The blur above me drifted towards Cedar Avenue, distorting the sky as it went. When it reached the intersection, the traffic lights turned yellow. Not blinking, solid yellow. All 4 directions. Cars slowed awkwardly, unsure what to do. I watched one driver roll down his window like he was about to shout at someone. The blur hovered briefly above the crossing, or maybe it just moved slower there, and then continued east toward the river. As soon as it left the intersection, the traffic lights snapped back to normal red-green patterns. The street lamps behind it flickered again, but stayed on this time. I stood frozen for a while, unsure whether to keep walking or just go back to Matt's and make up some excuse to crash on his couch. Eventually, I forced myself forward, partly because standing alone under those lights felt worse than walking. I kept glancing up, even though the blur was gone from sight. Every time I passed under a lamp, I listened for the shimmer, but the only things I heard were distant cars and the rustle of leaves. When I reached the intersection, a man in a red hoodie was standing on the corner smoking. He kept looking up too, the same way I probably had been. When I passed, he said, "Did you see that?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk about it, not with a stranger. I crossed Cedar and continued toward my apartment. The closer I got to home, the more normal everything seemed. Dogs barking behind fences, a porch light flickering because someone hadn't replaced the bulb, the distant sound of a train. But every time I stepped under a street lamp, I waited for it to die. 3 blocks from home, the streetlights stayed steady, but the air changed again. The temperature dropped fast, like stepping into an air-conditioned room. I rubbed my arms, confused. I could see my breath for maybe 3 seconds before the air warmed back up, as if whatever passed overhead had left a cold trail hanging behind. I didn't hear the shimmer again, but the sudden cold felt like the same thing, just quieter. When I finally reached my building, I practically jogged up the stairs. My hands shook a little when I unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment felt too normal. My kitchen light humming its usual hum, the clock on the stove blinking 10:56 like nothing had happened. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the street. Nothing strange happened. No darkened lamps, no shimmering sky, no warped stars. Around midnight, I heard something faint outside. Not the shimmer, just a soft click as the streetlight in front of my building turned off for its scheduled cycle. It startled me anyway. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I walked the exact same route to see if anything looked weird in daylight. Everything looked exactly as it should. The lamps intact, the intersection normal, the air a mild fall temperature. But halfway down Alder, where the last lamp had gone dark the night before, I found a patch of asphalt that looked polished. That's the only word I could think of. Not wet, not scraped. Polished. A smooth circle about 2 feet wide, like something had hovered just above it long enough to burnish the pavement. No one else seemed to notice it. Some days I walk through that block without thinking about it. Other days, especially when the air gets oddly still or when the lamps buzz a little louder than usual, I catch myself looking up, waiting for the sky to bend again, waiting for that faint shimmer to announce something drifting just overhead, invisible except for the way it snuffs out the light as it passes. I heard the chirping on a Thursday night, sometime after 9 p.m., while I was sitting on the back patio with a beer. It had been a long day, and the temperature had finally dropped enough that the air felt reasonable again. One of those warm Colorado summer nights where the breeze is barely there, just enough to move the wind chimes now and then. I usually sat outside for a bit before bed to decompress. That night felt normal at first. The sound came while I was halfway through my drink, soft, rhythmic, and too regular to be an insect. It wasn't a bird either. Birds don't chirp like that at night, and they definitely don't chirp in perfect pulses. It was faint, almost shy, but still distinct enough that I heard it over the hum of the swamp cooler through the screen door. Chirp, 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 about 1 per second. Clean, mechanical almost. I tilted my head a little, listening harder. It seemed to be coming from above, not from the yard, not the roof, higher than that. When I looked up, the sound stopped immediately, like someone hit pause. The sky was clear, typical dry summer night. Stars everywhere, the Milky Way a faint smear overhead. Nothing moved, no planes, no satellites, no clouds, just black sky and cold pinpoints of light. I waited a few seconds, still staring upward. Nothing. When I finally looked back down at my beer, the chirping returned, same rhythm. Same pitch, almost exactly where it had been before. I looked up again. It stopped. I tested it a few times, trying not to freak myself out. Look down, chirp. Look up, silence. Look down, chirp. Up, silence. It was too consistent to be a coincidence. Eventually, I kept my head angled downward, but shifted my eyes upward without moving too much. The chirping faltered, not a full stop, but a stutter, like it was reacting to my attention, even if I wasn't fully looking at it. When I lifted my chin by even an inch, the sound cut off. That was when my skin prickled. Not fear at first, just confusion that made me suddenly aware of how alone I was outside. I stood up slowly, trying not to crunch the gravel too loudly. I walked out into the middle of the yard where the patio light didn't reach as well. My eyes adjusted to the dark. The chirping didn't return yet. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then, chirp, chirp, chirp. I didn't look up this time. I kept my eyes level with the fence. The sound seemed to be coming from maybe 40 or 50 feet above me. Too high for a bug on the roof, too low for a plane, too steady for anything I could explain. It wasn't echoing off the houses. It didn't sound like something far away. It was overhead, directly. I took another step into the grass. The pulsing got slightly louder. Not by much, but enough that I could tell I'd moved closer to it. I finally whispered, "What is that?" Because hearing my own voice grounded me a little. The sound stopped again. Not faded. Stopped. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears then. The neighborhood around me was dead quiet. No dogs barking, no cars on the main road a block over, not even crickets. It was so still that it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. I backed up until I felt the patio concrete under my feet again. When I reached my chair, I sat down, gripping the armrests. Chirp. I jumped slightly at how sudden it was. Chirp, chirp. I stared straight ahead, letting my eyes relax, letting my peripheral vision widen. Sometimes you can catch movement that way better than looking straight at something. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something darker than the sky shift above me. Not a shape, more like a patch where the stars didn't match up, like one or two of them were slightly displaced. I blinked hard. The patch was gone. The chirping continued. I tried to see if the sound had a direction. I rotated my head a little. It stayed above. I crouched down. It stayed above. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my knees. Louder. I exhaled shakily and put the beer on the ground. My hands were trembling now, and I didn't want to spill it. I forced myself to stand again and walk to the far end of the yard, near the fence. The chirping stayed with me, not directly overhead every step, but shifting just slightly to stay aligned above me. Like it was tracking me, not from a distance, but from a fixed height, straight up. At one point, the chirping paused, and the silence got so deep, it almost rang in my ears. Then a softer, lower pulse joined it, like a second voice humming from above, slower and stretched out. I looked up without thinking. Silence again. I couldn't see anything. My eyes darted from cluster to cluster of stars, searching for any sign, motion, shape, anything. Nothing. I backed away from the fence and started walking toward the house. I didn't run, but I didn't stroll either. The chirping picked up again when my gaze dropped. Shorter intervals now. Chirp, 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 chirp. It reminded me of sonar pings. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. The porch light created a cone of brightness that felt suddenly unsafe, like stepping into it would make me visible in a way I didn't want to be. But the dark yard felt worse. I stepped into the light anyway. The chirping slowed. I placed my hand on the doorknob. The chirping stopped. I waited. After 5 long seconds, a single chirp sounded. Loudest yet. Not painfully loud, but sharp. Intentional. I turned the knob quickly and slipped inside, shutting the door behind me. I locked it without thinking and stood in the entryway with the lights off, listening. Nothing. Not even the refrigerator hum. I cracked the blinds just a sliver and peeked outside. The yard looked normal again. Streetlight down the block flickered faintly like always. Nothing overhead. No movement. I watched for 2 full minutes, hardly breathing. Still nothing. When I finally flicked on a lamp, the normal house sounds returned. The fridge humming, the swamp cooler rumbling, the faint chirp of a smoke detector battery dying somewhere down the street. I sat on the couch and stayed there until almost midnight, too keyed up to move, staring at the back door as though it might open on its own. Eventually, exhaustion won. When I went to bed, I left the blinds closed and the lamp on low. Just before I drifted off, I heard one faint chirp from outside. Not overhead, off to the right, east of the house. Distant, almost shy. Like whatever it was had drifted away but hadn't gone far. I didn't get up. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, imagining the sky above the neighborhood and life, wondering if something was passing over the houses the same way it had passed over mine. Pausing each time someone looked up, pulsing softly in the dark, continuing only when no one was paying direct attention. For days afterward, every time I sat outside, I caught myself listening hard for that pulsing sound. Some nights I heard normal noises, wind, insects, cars on the road. Other nights, the silence got thick again, too evenly quiet, and I'd go back inside after a few minutes, to the heart picking up speed. I haven't heard the chirping again the way I did that first night. Not clearly, not close, but every once in a while, right as I'm looking away from the stars, I think I hear the beginning of it, just one pulse, before the night swallows it like something paused again mid-motion, waiting for me to look up so it could disappear.